There is something deeply compelling about the idea that history is not what it seems. Beneath the surface of events we learn about in textbooks, beneath the treaties and battles and revolutions, many believe there exists another layer entirely. This hidden realm is populated by shadowy figures who pull strings from behind velvet curtains, who whisper in the ears of kings and presidents, who shape the destiny of nations according to plans known only to themselves. Among all the secret societies that have captured human imagination, none has proven more enduring or more fascinating than the Illuminati. The very name conjures images of candlelit ceremonies, arcane symbols, and power exercised in darkness. But to understand how this organization became the subject of countless theories and endless speculation, we must first journey back to a time when Europe was transforming, when old certainties were crumbling, and when the very notion of hidden knowledge held a different kind of power. The medieval world was a place where secrets mattered profoundly. Knowledge was not distributed democratically across populations, but was instead carefully guarded by those who understood its value. The Catholic Church maintained vast libraries and scriptoriums where monks copied texts by hand, preserving wisdom from ancient civilizations while also controlling what ordinary people could know. In this environment, any group that claimed to possess special knowledge automatically became an object of fascination and fear. The Knights Templar emerged during the Crusades as warrior monks sworn to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They accumulated enormous wealth and developed banking systems that made them indispensable to European royalty. But their power and secrecy eventually made them targets. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Templars, ordered their arrest on charges of heresy and devil worship. Under torture, some confessed to bizarre rituals and secret teachings. The order was dissolved, its leaders burned at the stake, and its treasures allegedly hidden away. Yet rumors persisted for centuries that the Templars had not truly vanished, that their secrets had been passed down through other channels, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The Rosicrucians represented another enigmatic presence in European mysticism. In the early 17th century, mysterious manifestos appeared in Germany, announcing the existence of a secret brotherhood of alchemists and sages who possessed profound knowledge about nature, medicine, and the cosmos. These documents promised that the Rosicrucians would reform all of Europe, that they worked silently for the betterment of humanity, and that they were invisible yet present. No one could find them, no one could join them by application, yet their ideas spread like wildfire through intellectual circles. Scholars and seekers wrote passionate pleas to be admitted to this hidden fellowship. The manifestos themselves might have been elaborate hoaxes or satirical commentaries on the religious conflicts tearing Europe apart, but they established a template that would echo through later secret societies. The notion that enlightened individuals might organize themselves in secrecy to guide civilization became a recurring dream in Western thought. By the middle of the 18th century, Europe was experiencing intellectual upheaval on a scale not seen since the Renaissance. The period known as the Enlightenment represented a fundamental challenge to traditional sources of authority. For over 1,000 years, the Christian Church had provided Europeans with a comprehensive framework for understanding reality. It explained where humans came from, what their purpose was, and where they would go after death. It justified the social order, sanctioned monarchs as divinely appointed rulers, and maintained that faith should take precedence over reason when the two came into conflict. But now philosophers and scientists were asking uncomfortable questions. They applied rational inquiry to subjects previously considered matters of faith alone. Isaac Newton had revealed that the heavens operated according to mathematical laws rather than angelic intervention. John Locke argued that governments derived their legitimacy from the consent of the governed rather than from God. Voltaire savagely mocked religious superstition and championed freedom of thought. Denis Diderot compiled an enormous encyclopedia attempting to systematize all human knowledge, making information accessible to anyone who could read. This intellectual ferment was transforming how educated Europeans understood the world, but it was also creating anxiety. Traditional structures of meaning were dissolving. If kings were not chosen by God, what justified their power? If the Bible was not literally true, what moral foundation remained? If reason should be the ultimate arbiter who decided what was reasonable? These questions made the Enlightenment exhilarating for some and terrifying for others. Authorities recognized that ideas could be dangerous, that certain kinds of knowledge could undermine the social order. Censorship was widespread, and expressing unorthodox views could result in imprisonment or exile. In Catholic regions especially, the Church maintained vigilant control over what could be published, taught, or discussed. Freethinkers learned to be careful, to express radical ideas obliquely, to gather in private rather than public spaces. The need for discretion made secret societies particularly attractive to those who wanted to explore forbidden knowledge without inviting persecution. Bavaria in the 1770s was a small state within the Holy Roman Empire, governed by conservative Catholic rulers who viewed Enlightenment thought with deep suspicion. The Jesuit order exercised enormous influence over education and intellectual life, ensuring that universities taught traditional scholastic philosophy rather than modern ideas. Into this environment came a young law professor with ambitions far exceeding his station. Adam Weishaupt was born in 1748 in Ingolstadt, a Bavarian city dominated by the university and the church. His father died when he was young, and he was raised by his godfather, who happened to be a curator of the university library. This gave young Adam access to a vast collection of books, including many works that challenged orthodox thinking. He was a precocious student, devouring philosophy, history, and political theory with unusual intensity. Weishaupt eventually became a professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt, but the position frustrated him. He was surrounded by Jesuit colleagues who he felt represented everything backward about the current system. They defended superstition, he believed, and opposed rational inquiry. They maintained unjust hierarchies and discouraged independent thought. Weishaupt began to envision a different kind of society, one where reason would triumph over dogma, where merit would replace inherited privilege, where enlightened individuals would guide humanity toward perfection. But he also recognized that such ideas could not be advanced openly in Bavaria. The authorities would never permit the kind of radical transformation he imagined. Change would have to come through subtler means, through the gradual education of influential people who would then transform society from within. He looked to existing models of organization for inspiration. Freemasonry had spread throughout Europe in the preceding decades, attracting aristocrats, merchants, and intellectuals to lodges where they conducted elaborate rituals and emphasized brotherhood, morality, and mutual aid. Masonic lodges provided spaces where men from different social classes could meet as equals, at least symbolically. They also surrounded their activities with secrecy, which made membership more exclusive and prestigious. Weishaupt saw the appeal of this model but thought Freemasonry had become too focused on ritual for its own sake, too disconnected from practical goals. He wanted to create something more purposeful, more revolutionary in its aims. He envisioned an organization that would identify and recruit the brightest minds, educate them in progressive philosophy, and deploy them strategically into positions of influence throughout society. These illuminated individuals would then work to undermine superstition, limit the power of monarchs and clergy, and establish a rational social order based on human dignity and freedom. The concept gestated in Weishaupt's mind for several years as he refined his vision and planned the structure of his secret society. He understood that the organization would need compelling rituals to attract members, a hierarchy to maintain discipline, and absolute secrecy to avoid suppression. He studied the Jesuits closely, ironically drawing organizational lessons from the very group he opposed. The Jesuits had created a highly disciplined order that wielded enormous influence through education and careful positioning of members in key roles. Weishaupt wanted to build something similar, but directed toward opposite ends. Where the Jesuits worked to strengthen Catholic orthodoxy and papal authority, his organization would work to promote reason and individual liberty. Where the Jesuits embraced obedience to religious superiors, his members would cultivate independent critical thinking, though they would still need to follow the directives of the order itself. The contradiction between promoting liberty while demanding obedience from members was one Weishaupt never fully resolved. As plans crystallized, Weishaupt realized he would need to move carefully in recruiting initial members. Bavaria was a place where everyone watched everyone else, where unconventional ideas could quickly bring unwanted attention from authorities. He would begin with students, young men whose minds were still forming, who might be attracted to the promise of special knowledge and enlightened fellowship. He would appeal to their vanity and their idealism simultaneously, making them feel chosen and superior, while also convincing them they were working toward noble goals. The society would start small, perhaps just a handful of trusted individuals, but it would grow organically as these members recruited others. Eventually, if all went according to plan, the illuminated would be positioned throughout government, universities, courts, and churches. They would communicate through coded messages, recognize each other through secret signs, and coordinate their efforts to gradually transform society. The old order would not be overthrown through violent revolution, but would instead be hollowed out from within, replaced by a new system based on reason and human flourishing. In conceiving this plan, Weishaupt was both a product of his time and curiously ahead of it. The Enlightenment had taught that reason could solve human problems, that progress was possible, that tradition should not be accepted simply because it was traditional. These ideas animated Weishaupt's project, but his faith in secrecy, his conviction that a small enlightened elite should guide the ignorant masses toward improvement, his willingness to use manipulation and deception for supposedly benevolent ends, these aspects would later make his organization deeply controversial. Critics would charge that the Illuminati represented not the triumph of reason, but the arrogance of intellectuals who believed they knew better than everyone else. Defenders would counter that given the oppressive conditions in Bavaria, secrecy was the only possible path for progressive change. Both perspectives contain elements of truth, and the tension between them helps explain why the Illuminati would become such a potent symbol in later centuries. The stage was set for the founding of an organization that would exist in its original form for barely more than a decade, but would cast a shadow across centuries. Weishaupt had his vision, his grievances against the existing order, his borrowed organizational principles, and his burning conviction that he could change the world. What he needed now was the right moment to begin, the right people to trust with his secret, and the right name to encapsulate his ambitions. That name would be the Order of the Illuminati, derived from the Latin word for enlightened. It suggested that members had received special illumination, that they could see truths invisible to ordinary people, that they had been brought from darkness into light. In a world where knowledge was power and secrecy was necessary, it was a name perfectly calculated to attract the ambitious, the curious, and the idealistic. The story of how Weishaupt brought this vision to life, how the organization grew and spread, how it was ultimately destroyed, and how it achieved a strange immortality in the collective imagination. This story is one of the most fascinating and misunderstood chapters in the history of secret societies. The date that Adam Weishaupt chose for the founding of his secret society carries its own significance. May 1st, 1776 would mark the birth of the Order of the Illuminati, though the organization would not use that name initially. Weishaupt first called it the Order of Perfectibilists, reflecting his belief that humans could be perfected through reason and education. The date coincided with Walpurgis Night in Germanic tradition, a time associated with witches and supernatural gatherings, though this was likely coincidental rather than deliberately symbolic. More relevant was that spring represented new beginnings, and 1776 was already proving to be a year of revolution. Across the Atlantic, American colonists were moving toward declaring independence from Britain, asserting radical new principles about human rights and government legitimacy. Weishaupt could not have known about these parallel developments, but the synchronicity is striking. Both movements, in their different ways, challenged traditional authority and proclaimed enlightened principles, though one would succeed in establishing a new nation while the other would be crushed before it could fully realize its ambitions. The first meeting of the Illuminati was a modest affair, nothing like the elaborate ceremonies that would develop later. Weishaupt gathered 4 students in a private space, probably his own rooms, and outlined his vision for a society that would gradually illuminate Europe. These young men were not chosen randomly. They were intelligent, discontented with the status quo, and hungry for something that would give their lives greater meaning and purpose. Weishaupt understood that recruitment must begin with people who felt themselves undervalued, who sensed they deserved more recognition than conventional society offered. By inviting them into a secret organization with grand aims, he was offering them significance, a chance to be part of something larger than their individual lives. This psychological insight would prove central to the Illuminati's recruitment strategy throughout its existence. The organizational structure Weishaupt designed was complex and hierarchical, borrowing elements from Freemasonry while adding innovations of his own. Members would progress through different ranks as they demonstrated commitment and absorbed the teachings associated with each level. The lowest degree was that of novice, the entry point where new recruits learned basic principles and were evaluated for their suitability to advance. Novices were given classical pseudonyms to use within the order, a practice that added mystique while also providing a layer of protection. If the authorities somehow discovered the society, members could claim these were merely literary exercises or harmless games. Weishaupt himself took the name Spartacus after the rebel slave who had challenged Rome, a choice that revealed how he saw himself in relation to the established powers of Bavaria. After proving themselves as novices, members could advance to the degree of Minerval, named after Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. Minor vows were introduced to more of the order's philosophy and began to understand its true aims more clearly. They attended meetings where philosophical texts were discussed, where critiques of religious and political authority were ventured more openly, and where the vision of a rationally organized society was elaborated. The transition from novice to Minerval was treated as a significant initiation, with ceremonies designed to impress upon the candidate that they were entering a higher state of understanding. Weishaupt recognized that ritual, even for rationalists who claimed to reject superstition, served important psychological functions. It created shared experiences that bonded members together, it marked transitions in status, and it surrounded the organization with an aura of mystery that made membership more valued. Beyond the Minerval degree came the rank of Illuminated Minerval, reserved for those who had fully embraced the order's teachings and demonstrated readiness to work actively toward its goals. These were the true Illuminati, the enlightened ones who had thrown off the shackles of superstition and prejudice. They were expected to recruit new members, to infiltrate other organizations, and to begin positioning themselves for influence in the wider world. Weishaupt envisioned even higher degrees that would be revealed only to the most trusted members, degrees that would disclose the ultimate secrets and strategies of the order. This structure created a constant sense of advancement, of always having more to learn, more to achieve. No one except Weishaupt himself knew all the secrets, which meant every member was simultaneously initiated and ignorant, enlightened and in darkness. The methods of recruitment were carefully calculated to appeal to different psychological needs. When approaching potential members, existing Illuminati were instructed to first assess the target's character, ambitions, and grievances. Was this someone who resented their current position? Did they show intellectual curiosity? Were they frustrated with religious or political authorities? Did they crave recognition that conventional channels had denied them? Once these qualities were identified, the approach could be tailored accordingly. The prospect would be told carefully and gradually that there existed a society of exceptional individuals working toward the betterment of humanity. They would be given hints about the society's reach and influence, suggestions that powerful people were already members, implications that joining would provide access to knowledge and networks otherwise unavailable. The key was to make the prospect feel that they were being selected, that membership was a privilege granted only to the worthy, not something anyone could simply request. Secrecy was presented not as something shameful, but as necessary protection. Bavaria's rulers feared enlightenment ideas and would certainly suppress any organization that challenged their authority. Therefore, members had to protect themselves and each other through absolute discretion. They used coded language in correspondence with elaborate systems for disguising names and locations. Cities were given classical pseudonyms. Munich became Athens, Ingolstadt became Eleusis. Members reported regularly to their superiors about their activities, their progress in recruiting, and even their observations of other members. This surveillance created a system where everyone watched everyone else, ostensibly to ensure loyalty, but also to give Weishaupt detailed knowledge of his network. He wanted to know everything about his members, their strengths and weaknesses, their secrets and vulnerabilities, because this information could be used to guide them more effectively and, if necessary, to ensure their continued obedience. The content of Illuminati teachings evolved as members advanced through the degrees, but certain themes remained constant. Reason must triumph over superstition. Human institutions should be judged by whether they promoted human flourishing rather than by tradition or divine sanction. All people possessed inherent dignity and deserved education and opportunity. Monarchical and religious authorities maintained their power through ignorance and fear, keeping populations subjected by denying them knowledge. The Illuminati, as the enlightened vanguard, had a duty to spread rational thought and to work toward a future society organized on philosophical principles rather than historical accidents of power. These were genuinely progressive ideas for the time, aligned with the best impulses of the Enlightenment. But the methods troubled some, even among those sympathetic to the goals. Was it ethical to use deception and manipulation to promote truth? Could a secret society genuinely serve democratic principles? Did the emphasis on absolute obedience to superiors contradict the rhetoric of individual liberty? Weishaupt himself seems to have been remarkably unconcerned with these contradictions. He believed firmly that the ends justified the means, that the current generation might need to be manipulated for the benefit of future ones, that the ignorant masses were not yet ready to govern themselves and needed guidance from enlightened elites. His writings reveal someone deeply conflicted about human nature. On one hand, he believed humans were perfectible through proper education and social organization. On the other hand, he viewed most people as fundamentally foolish, easily controlled by priests and kings, incapable of recognizing their own best interests. This tension between faith in human potential and contempt for actual humans would characterize the Illuminati throughout its existence. Members were told they were working to liberate humanity while simultaneously being instructed to view non-members as inferior and manipulable. The early years of the organization were frustrating for Weishaupt. Growth was slower than he had hoped, recruitment was difficult, and maintaining secrecy while also expanding membership proved challenging. By 1777, the Illuminati had perhaps 24 members, mostly students and a few junior academics. this was hardly the network of influence Weishaupt had envisioned. The problem was that the organization lacked prestige and resources. Potential recruits were not impressed by a secret society that consisted mainly of impoverished students. What the Illuminati needed was a connection to an existing network, a way to reach people of actual power and position. Weishaupt realized that Freemasonry provided exactly such a network. Masonic lodges had spread throughout Europe and attracted aristocrats, wealthy merchants, government officials, and military officers. If the Illuminati could infiltrate Freemasonry, members could be recruited from these lodges, and the order would gain access to the social and political elite. This strategy required Weishaupt himself to become a Freemason, which he did in 1777, joining a lodge in Munich. He approached Masonry with mixed feelings, finding the rituals somewhat absurd, but recognizing the utility of the network. Once initiated, he began quietly recruiting Masons into the Illuminati, presenting his order as a higher form of enlightenment that corrected the deficiencies of ordinary Masonry. Some Masons proved receptive to this message, particularly those who felt that Masonic lodges had become too focused on socializing and too little on serious philosophical work. The Illuminati offered something more intellectually rigorous, more purposeful, more revolutionary. Weishaupt carefully targeted Masons who seemed dissatisfied or ambitious, who wanted to feel they were part of something truly significant rather than just another gentleman's club. The breakthrough came when Adolf Freiherr Knigge joined the Illuminati in 1780. Knigge was an experienced Freemason with connections throughout German lodges and considerable organizational talent. He immediately recognized both the potential of Weishaupt's vision and the weaknesses in how the order was structured. Knigge rewrote much of the Illuminati's ritual content, making ceremonies more elaborate and impressive. He integrated the Illuminati degrees with Masonic ranks, creating a system where Masons could advance through familiar structures while gradually being introduced to Illuminati teachings. Most importantly, Knigge had the social skills and contacts that Weishaupt lacked. Where Weishaupt was prickly, suspicious, and often alienated potential allies, Knigge was charming, diplomatic, and effective at building networks. Under his influence, the Illuminati began to grow rapidly, expanding beyond Bavaria into other German states and even reaching into Austria, Switzerland, and Italy. The partnership between Weishaupt and Knigge was productive, but troubled from the beginning. The two men had fundamentally different visions for what the Illuminati should be. Weishaupt wanted absolute control, viewing the organization as his creation and members as instruments of his will. Knigge believed in a more collegial structure where senior members would collectively determine strategy. Weishaupt was deeply anti-clerical and wanted the order to actively undermine religious authority. Knigge, while also a rationalist, thought such aggressive opposition was unnecessary and counterproductive. Weishaupt was contemptuous of most Masonic ritual and wanted to eventually reveal that the Illuminati superseded Masonry entirely. Knigge valued the Masonic connection and wanted to reform Masonry from within rather than replace it. These tensions would eventually destroy their partnership, but for several years they collaborated effectively, each compensating for the other's weaknesses. By the early 1780s, the Illuminati had achieved genuine influence. Membership probably reached around 2,000 at the movement's peak, which might seem small but included some remarkably important individuals. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, perhaps the greatest German writer of the age, joined the order. Johann Gottfried Herder, the influential philosopher and literary critic, became a member. Several dukes and princes were recruited, along with numerous professors, lawyers, and government officials. The society established lodges in major cities throughout German-speaking Europe. It created an extensive correspondence network and developed sophisticated methods for coordinating activities across distances. Members placed in government positions provided intelligence about official policies. Those in educational roles worked to reform curricula along more rational lines. Publishers who were members ensured that Enlightenment texts received wider distribution. This was precisely the kind of distributed influence Weishaupt had originally envisioned, the gradual penetration of existing institutions by enlightened individuals who would transform society from within. The rituals had become increasingly elaborate as Nig refined them. Initiations involved blindfolding, symbolic journeys from darkness to light, oaths of secrecy and obedience, and the revelation of passwords and signs by which members could recognize each other. These ceremonies served practical functions beyond their dramatic qualities. They created strong emotional bonds between members, made defection psychologically difficult, and established clear hierarchies that reinforced discipline. The oath-taking was particularly important, as members swore absolute loyalty and promised to reveal everything about themselves to the Order while keeping everything about the Order secret from outsiders. This asymmetry of knowledge, where the organization knew everything about members but members knew relatively little about the full organization, gave leaders powerful leverage. Someone who contemplated leaving or betraying the Order had to consider that their deepest secrets were held by the leadership and could be weaponized against them. Despite this growth and apparent success, the Illuminati remained vulnerable. The entire structure depended on secrecy, yet the more members it gained, the harder secrecy became to maintain. Loose talk, drunken boasting, careless correspondence, all posed constant dangers. Some Freemasons who had not been recruited into the Illuminati began to resent the secret society operating within their lodges. They suspected correctly that Illuminati members were following a hidden agenda, recruiting selectively and treating non-Illuminati Masons as dupes. Complaints began to surface, and some lodges moved to exclude or expel suspected Illuminati. Meanwhile, authorities in various German states were becoming aware that some kind of organized secret society was growing, though they did not yet understand its full extent. In Bavaria especially, where the Illuminati had started and where Weishaupt's enemies were most concentrated, suspicion was building. Conservative forces in the government, the university, and the church recognized that something was happening, that traditional authority was being challenged in new ways, and that a secretive organization might be coordinating these challenges. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would destroy the Illuminati, but also ensure its immortality. The expansion of the Illuminati beyond its Bavarian origins represented both the fulfillment of Weishaupt's vision and the beginning of problems that would ultimately prove fatal. As the Order spread into other German states, it encountered different political environments, varying degrees of religious tolerance, and diverse Masonic traditions. Each new region required adaptation of strategy and careful navigation of local power structures. In Saxony, the Illuminati found fertile ground among intellectuals frustrated with conservative university administrations. In Frankfurt, merchants and bankers proved receptive to ideas about rational economic organization. In Weimar, the cultural capital where Goethe held court, the Order attracted artists and writers who saw Enlightenment as compatible with creative expression. This geographic diversity gave the Illuminati resilience, as suppression in one location did not necessarily affect operations elsewhere, but it also created coordination challenges and diluted the purity of Weishaupt's original vision. The process of infiltrating Masonic lodges required patience and subtlety. Illuminati members could not simply announce their true affiliation or attempt to take over lodges openly. Instead, they worked gradually, building trust within lodges, demonstrating commitment to Masonic principles, and slowly identifying which members might be receptive to additional enlightenment. The recruitment pitch varied depending on the target. For intellectuals, the appeal was philosophical depth and access to advanced knowledge. For aristocrats, it was the promise of influence and connection to important networks. For ambitious middle-class professionals, it was the possibility of advancement that their birth denied them in conventional society. The Illuminati offered different things to different people, which made it effective at recruitment, but also meant that members often had quite different understandings of what the organization was actually about and what it hoped to achieve. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's membership illustrates both the prestige the Illuminati could attract and the ambiguity surrounding what membership actually meant. Goethe was already famous when he joined in 1783, having achieved literary celebrity with his novel The Sorrows of Young Werther and his early plays. He was serving as a minister in the Weimar court, balancing administrative responsibilities with his creative work. His sponsor into the Illuminati was Johann Joachim Christoph Bode, a bookseller and influential Mason who had become one of the order's most effective recruiters. For Goethe, the Illuminati seems to have represented one more expression of Enlightenment ideals he already embraced. He attended meetings, participated in philosophical discussions, and maintained correspondence with other members. But there is little evidence he was deeply involved in the order's political machinations, or that his thinking was fundamentally shaped by Illuminati teachings. He was already a rationalist, already skeptical of religious orthodoxy, already committed to human development through education and culture. The Illuminati gave him a network of like-minded individuals, but did not transform his worldview. Johann Gottfried Herder's involvement followed a similar pattern. As a philosopher, theologian, and literary critic, Herder was developing ideas about human history, language, and culture that would prove enormously influential. His conception of humanity as diverse cultures, each with their own genius, rather than a single universal standard, was revolutionary for its time. He joined the Illuminati in Weimar, probably through Goethe's influence, and found its emphasis on reason and human potential congenial. But Herder was also a Lutheran pastor, which created some tension with the Illuminati's more radical anti-clericalism. He seems to have viewed the order as a philosophical society rather than a revolutionary conspiracy, a place for intellectual exchange rather than political plotting. This divergence between what leadership envisioned and what many members actually experienced would become increasingly problematic as authorities began investigating the organization. The nobility who joined presented different complications. Several German princes and dukes became Illuminati, attracted by promises of enlightened governance and the prestige of membership in an exclusive society. Duke Ernest II of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg was a prominent member, as was Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick. These men wielded real political power, and their membership gave the Illuminati genuine influence in certain courts. But aristocratic members also tended to be more conservative than the bourgeois intellectuals who formed the order's core. They were interested in reforming government to make it more efficient and rational, not in abolishing monarchy or fundamentally restructuring society. They saw the Illuminati as compatible with enlightened absolutism, the idea that strong monarchs guided by rational principles could best serve their subjects. This was quite different from Weishaupt's more radical vision of ultimately replacing hereditary rule with merit-based governance. The order thus contained internal contradictions, with members pursuing conflicting visions of what enlightenment actually meant in practice. The recruitment of Baron Adolf von Knigge had transformed the organization, but the relationship between him and Weishaupt was deteriorating steadily. Knigge had brought in most of the important members, had revised the rituals to make them more appealing, and had expanded the order's reach far beyond what Weishaupt could have accomplished alone. But he was also asserting more independence, making decisions without consulting Weishaupt, and promoting a vision of the Illuminati that emphasized reform within existing structures rather than revolutionary transformation. Weishaupt increasingly felt that Knigge was diluting the order's radical potential, attracting members who were merely fashionable liberals rather than true revolutionaries. Their correspondence became acrimonious, filled with accusations and recriminations. Weishaupt suspected Knigge of trying to seize control of the organization. Knigge believed Weishaupt was paranoid, controlling, and unable to work collaboratively with talented people. Both men were probably correct in their assessments of the other. The internal structure of the Illuminati had grown complex enough that most members had little understanding of the whole organization. This was intentional, following the principle that members should know only what was necessary for their particular role. Lower-ranking members believed they were part of a philosophical society dedicated to spreading Enlightenment values. They attended meetings where classic texts were discussed, where rational arguments against superstition were rehearsed, and where they socialized with other educated men who shared their values. Middle-ranking members understood that the organization had political aims, that it sought to position members in influential roles, and that coordination across regions was occurring, but they typically did not know who occupied the highest positions or what ultimate strategies were being pursued. Only the inner circle, perhaps a dozen men at most, had comprehensive knowledge of membership, plans and resources. This compartmentalization provided security, but also meant that Weishaupt and a few others could exercise enormous power without accountability to the broader membership. The goals articulated at different levels of the organization varied considerably. To novices and lower-degree members, the Illuminati presented itself as working for education reform, religious tolerance, and meritocratic advancement. These were goals that moderate Enlightenment figures could embrace without controversy. To more advanced members, the true aims were described more radically: undermining the Catholic Church's political power, limiting monarchical authority, creating an international network of enlightened individuals who would coordinate to transform society, and ultimately establishing a rational world order that transcended existing national and religious divisions. Some later critics would claim that the highest degrees revealed even more extreme objectives, including the complete abolition of religion, property, marriage, and government. Whether these accusations reflected actual Illuminati teachings or were exaggerations and fabrications remains debated. Weishaupt's surviving writings show someone deeply hostile to existing institutions and willing to contemplate their destruction, but also pragmatic enough to recognize that revolutionary change must come gradually. The surveillance and reporting system within the Illuminati was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Members were required to submit regular written reports to their immediate superiors, documenting their activities, recruitment efforts, and observations of other members. These reports flowed upward through the hierarchy, eventually reaching Weishaupt and his closest advisors. The system served multiple purposes. It allowed leadership to monitor member loyalty and identify potential problems. It provided intelligence about political developments in different regions. It helped coordinate strategy by ensuring that leadership understood local conditions. But it also created an atmosphere of mutual suspicion, as members knew they were being watched and evaluated constantly. Some reports contained character assessments of fellow members, noting weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and indiscretions that could be exploited if necessary. This Dang-An system was later used by critics to argue that the Illuminati represented a totalitarian vision that sacrificed individual privacy and autonomy to organizational control. The actual accomplishments of the Illuminati during its peak years are difficult to assess with precision. The organization certainly influenced appointments to some academic positions, with members promoting other members for professorships and administrative roles. It affected publication decisions, as members who were publishers or censors ensured that Enlightenment texts received favorable treatment. It shaped discussions in certain Masonic lodges and intellectual circles, introducing topics and perspectives aligned with Illuminati teachings. Some government policies in states where members held positions may have been influenced by Illuminati thinking, though disentangling this from broader Enlightenment trends is challenging. What the organization did not do, despite later conspiracy theories, was control European politics or direct major historical events. The Illuminati was influential among a certain segment of educated German-speaking elites, but it was never powerful enough to dictate to monarchs or manipulate international affairs. The tension between secrecy and influence created an inherent problem. To actually change society, the Illuminati needed to recruit influential people and coordinate their activities openly enough to be effective. But the more visible the organization became, the more vulnerable it was to detection and suppression. Weishaupt wanted members to infiltrate institutions and rise to positions of power, but he also demanded absolute secrecy about their affiliation. This was a difficult balance to maintain. As more people joined, and as the organization's activities became more ambitious, maintaining secrecy became increasingly impossible. Disgruntled former members might reveal what they knew. Members might gossip carelessly. Correspondence could be intercepted. The very success of the organization created the conditions for its exposure. By 1784, suspicion was mounting in Bavaria. Catholic authorities had become convinced that a secret society was working to undermine religious faith and traditional morality. They did not yet know the full extent of the Illuminati, but were determined to uncover and destroy whatever conspiracy existed. Some former members, embittered by personal disputes or genuinely alarmed by what they had learned, began providing information to the authorities. These defectors described secret oaths, coded correspondence, surveillance systems, and discussions of gradually transforming society along radical lines. Even accounting for exaggeration and distortion, the report suggested an organization far more extensive and purposeful than authorities had imagined. The Bavarian government, under Elector Karl Theodor, began to take the threat seriously. Karl Theodor was a conservative ruler closely allied with the Catholic Church and deeply suspicious of enlightenment ideas. The suggestion that a secret network was infiltrating his government and university was alarming. Maria Anna Victoria of Bavaria, the elector's wife, was particularly influential in pushing for action against secret societies. Deeply pious and politically conservative, she viewed the Enlightenment itself as a threat to Christian civilization. She had the elector's ear and urged aggressive measures against any organization that might be spreading rationalist or anti-clerical ideas. Court Jesuits reinforced these concerns, arguing that secret societies were coordinating an attack on religion throughout Europe. They pointed to the dissolution of the Jesuit order by the Pope in 1773, which they attributed partly to Masonic and rationalist lobbying. Now, they warned, the same forces were organizing more systematically through societies like the Illuminati. Whether these warnings reflected genuine belief or calculated efforts to restore Jesuit power and eliminate rivals is unclear, but they found a receptive audience in Karl Theodor's court. The first official move against the Illuminati came in June 1784, when Karl Theodor issued an edict banning all secret societies not explicitly approved by the state. The edict did not name the Illuminati specifically, but clearly targeted organizations like it. Membership in unauthorized secret societies was made illegal, with penalties including dismissal from government positions and possible criminal prosecution. The edict created panic within the Illuminati. Some members immediately resigned, burning papers and severing contacts to avoid detection. Others tried to continue operating more carefully, hoping that the ban would not be vigorously enforced. Weishaupt, from his position at the University of Ingolstadt, tried to mount a defense, arguing that the Illuminati was simply a philosophical society with no political aims. But his protests were unconvincing, particularly as more information about the organization's actual activities began to surface. The situation worsened dramatically for Weishaupt personally. His enemies at the university, particularly Jesuits and conservative faculty who had long resented his influence, saw an opportunity to destroy him professionally. They provided authorities with evidence of his involvement in the Illuminati and suggested that he had used his academic position to recruit students into a subversive organization. In February 1785, Weishaupt was dismissed from his professorship and ordered to leave Bavaria. He fled to the neighboring state of Saxe-Gotha, where Duke Ernest, himself an Illuminati member, offered him protection and a pension. But Weishaupt's flight confirmed suspicions in many people's minds that he had indeed been leading a dangerous conspiracy. If he had nothing to hide, critics asked, why had he run rather than staying to defend himself? With Weishaupt in exile and the organization under official prohibition, the Illuminati might have simply dissolved and been forgotten, remembered only as a minor episode in late Enlightenment Germany. But events would take a turn that ensured the order's notoriety far outlasted its actual existence. The Bavarian authorities, not content with merely banning the society, were determined to uncover its full extent and punish everyone involved. What they would discover in their investigations would shock them and provide material for conspiracy theories that continue to this day. The exposure phase was about to begin, and with it, the transformation of the Illuminati from an actual, if limited, secret society into a symbol of hidden power that would haunt the imagination of Europe and eventually the world. The exposure of the Illuminati's secrets came through a combination of betrayal, accident, and determined investigation. Throughout 1785, the Bavarian government intensified its efforts to understand exactly what the Illuminati had been plotting. Karl Theodor's officials interrogated former members, offering immunity to those who cooperated and threatening harsh penalties for those who resisted. Some defectors provided detailed testimony about recruitment methods, organizational structure, and the content of secret teachings. Others turned over correspondence and documents they had retained, despite instructions to destroy such materials. Each revelation made authorities more convinced that they had uncovered a serious conspiracy rather than merely a philosophical discussion group. The picture emerging was of an organization far more extensive and coordinated than they had initially suspected, one that had successfully infiltrated numerous institutions and had been working systematically to undermine traditional authority. The breakthrough that would cement the Illuminati's notoriety came in October 1786, when Bavarian authorities conducted a raid on the home of Xavier von Zwack, a former member of the Bavarian Council and one of Weishaupt's closest collaborators. Zwack had been identified as a key figure in the organization, someone who had access to extensive records and correspondence. The raid uncovered a treasure trove of documents that officials could hardly believe. There were membership lists showing the penetration of the Illuminati throughout German states and beyond. There were coded letters discussing strategies for recruitment and infiltration. There were instructions for surveilling members and compiling dossiers on their private lives. There were philosophical writings outlining visions of society transformed according to rationalist principles. There were also materials that could be interpreted, depending on one's perspective, as either radical Enlightenment philosophy or dangerous revolutionary scheming. Among the seized papers were documents outlining plans for a system of mutual surveillance among members, methods for intercepting and reading correspondence of non-members, strategies for manipulating people into supporting Illuminati aims without realizing they were being used, and discussions of gradually eroding the influence of church and monarchy. There were also writings suggesting that conventional morality was merely a tool used by authorities to control populations, and that enlightened individuals might transcend traditional ethical constraints in pursuit of greater goods. Whether these represented actual Illuminati policy or merely theoretical discussions is debatable, but they provided sensational material that confirmed the worst fears of conservative critics. The Bavarian government immediately began compiling and publishing these documents, presenting them as proof that a vast conspiracy against religion and legitimate government had been operating in secret. The publication of the seized Illuminati papers created a sensation throughout Europe. The documents were collected and printed in multiple volumes under official government auspices, which gave them credibility and ensured wide distribution. Readers were shocked by what they learned. Here was apparent proof that educated, respectable men had been secretly organizing to overthrow the established order. The surveillance systems and manipulation techniques described in the documents seem to confirm that Illuminati members were willing to use any means to achieve their ends. The discussions of gradually undermining religious faith and replacing it with rationalism alarmed believers who saw this as an attack on the foundations of civilization. The suggestion that Illuminati members occupied important positions in government, courts, and universities created paranoia about who could be trusted. If the conspiracy had penetrated so deeply in Bavaria, might it not exist in other states as well? Conservative and religious writers seized on the Illuminati revelations as validation of their warnings about the dangers of enlightenment thinking. They had long argued that rationalism led inevitably to atheism, that questioning traditional authority was a path to chaos, and that secret societies posed threats to social order. Now they had concrete examples to point to, documented evidence of what they had been warning against. Pamphlets and books analyzing the Illuminati conspiracy began appearing throughout Europe, each adding its own interpretations and often embellishments to the known facts. The actual documents provided plenty of material for criticism, but many commentators went further, attributing to the Illuminati plans and powers that were exaggerated or entirely fabricated. The distinction between what the Illuminati had actually been and what it represented symbolically began to blur almost immediately. The prosecutions that followed the document seizures were selective but effective at destroying what remained of the organization. Several prominent members were dismissed from government positions. Some faced criminal charges, though most of these were eventually dropped or resulted in relatively light sentences. The real punishment was social and professional ruin. To be identified as an Illuminati member meant being branded as a conspirator against legitimate authority, as someone who had taken secret oaths and pursued a hidden agenda. In the conservative climate of Bavaria, this was devastating to reputations and careers. Some former members published confessions and denunciations of the order, claiming they had been deceived about its true nature or had belatedly recognized their errors. These recantations often followed familiar patterns, praising the Illuminati's ostensible goals while condemning its methods and secrecy, a way of preserving some dignity while disavowing the organization. Baron Adolf von Nigger, who had done more than anyone except Weishaupt to build the Illuminati, had already distanced himself from the order before the final crackdown. His disputes with Weishaupt had become irreconcilable by 1784, and he had formally resigned, taking with him a number of members loyal to him personally. Nigger's departure had significantly weakened the organization, removing its most effective recruiter and organizer. After the Bavarian exposure, Nig published statements minimizing his role and insisting that the Illuminati had been simply a Masonic reform movement that had been mischaracterized by its enemies. He claimed that the more radical elements in the seized documents did not represent mainstream Illuminati thinking, but rather reflected Weishaupt's personal extremism. This defense was self-serving but contained some truth. The organization had indeed meant different things to different members, and Weishaupt's vision was more radical than what most members had understood or endorsed. Adam Weishaupt spent the rest of his life in exile, protected by Duke Ernest of Saxe-Gotha, but unable to return to Bavaria or regain his former position. From his exile, he published several defenses of the Illuminati, attempting to rehabilitate the organization's reputation and his own. These writings are illuminating because they show Weishaupt's actual thinking without the need for secrecy or coded language. He defended the Illuminati's goals as noble, arguing that working to spread reason and limit the power of superstition and arbitrary authority was morally praiseworthy. He acknowledged the organization's methods had involved secrecy and strategic deception, but justified these as necessary responses to oppressive conditions. He denied the more extreme accusations, claiming that the Illuminati had never planned violent revolution or sought to destroy all religion, only to limit institutional religion's political power and encourage rational thinking. whether Weishaupt's published defenses represented his true beliefs or merely a strategic retreat from more radical positions expressed privately is difficult to determine. His correspondence with close collaborators, some of which was seized and published by Bavarian authorities, certainly shows someone willing to contemplate revolutionary changes to society, someone who viewed most people with contempt and believed that enlightened elites should guide humanity toward improvement, whether the masses wished it or not. But it also shows someone genuinely committed to Enlightenment values of reason, individual dignity, and human progress. Weishaupt was neither the benign reformer his defenders claimed, nor the diabolical conspirator his critics portrayed. He was an ambitious intellectual who created an organization that combined genuine idealism with manipulative methods, progressive goals with elitist attitudes, and Enlightenment philosophy with authoritarian impulses. By 1787, the Bavarian Illuminati had ceased to exist as a functioning organization. A second government edict in March 1785 had specifically named the Illuminati and made membership punishable by death, though this extreme penalty was never actually imposed. The combination of legal prohibition, official exposure, prosecutions, and social stigma had destroyed the network. Some lodges in other German states may have continued meeting for a time, but they were isolated from each other and lacked central coordination. The name Illuminati became toxic, something no one wanted to be associated with. Former members destroyed any evidence of their involvement and denied having ever belonged to the organization. The elaborate system of communication and coordination that Weishaupt and Knigge had built collapsed completely. The actual historical Illuminati, as a real organization with members and activities, disappeared after barely more than a decade of existence. The dissolution raises interesting questions about what the Illuminati had actually accomplished during its brief existence. On one level, it had achieved remarkable success at recruitment and expansion, attracting some of the most prominent intellectuals and influential figures in German-speaking Europe. It had demonstrated that secret organization and strategic infiltration could effectively spread ideas and coordinate activities across distances. It had shown that Enlightenment philosophy could be mobilized into an organized movement rather than remaining merely abstract theorizing. The Illuminati had genuinely influenced some academic appointments, publication decisions, and policy discussions. It had created networks of like-minded individuals who supported each other professionally and personally. For several years, it had represented a real force in German intellectual and political life. On another level, the Illuminati's accomplishments were limited and ephemeral. It had not managed to substantially reduce the Catholic Church's power or limit monarchical authority. It had not transformed society according to rational principles or created lasting institutions that embodied its vision. The network collapsed rapidly once it faced official opposition, suggesting it was never as powerful or resilient as either members or critics believed. Most members had never been deeply committed revolutionaries, but were instead fashionable liberals who enjoyed the mystique of membership while not fully embracing the organization's radical potential. The Illuminati's actual influence on events was modest, far less than what its internal documents optimistically projected or what panicked conservatives feared. As an organization, it was more impressive in theory than in practice, more significant for what it represented than for what it achieved. Yet the Illuminati's brief existence had consequences far beyond what Weishaupt could have imagined. The exposure and publication of the organization's documents ensured that people throughout Europe learned about its methods, goals, and structure in great detail. This created a template for how secret societies might operate and what they might attempt to accomplish. It also created a symbol, a concrete example that could be invoked whenever anyone wanted to warn about hidden conspiracies. The Illuminati became a reference point, a cautionary tale about what could happen when intellectuals organized in secret to pursue radical transformation of society. Conservative and religious authorities used the Illuminati example to discredit Enlightenment ideas more broadly, arguing that rationalism inevitably led to conspiracy against legitimate authority. This was unfair to the Enlightenment as a whole, which encompassed diverse thinkers and approaches, but it was effective rhetoric. The timing of the Illuminati's exposure also proved significant. Just a few years after the Bavarian crackdown, the French Revolution erupted, shocking Europe with the speed and violence of its transformation. Suddenly, the warnings about secret societies plotting against established order seemed prophetic. Observers looked for explanations of how the French monarchy, apparently stable and powerful, could collapse so quickly. Some concluded that hidden conspirators must have been working for years to undermine the system, preparing the ground for revolution. The Illuminati provided a ready model for how such preparation might have occurred. Critics began drawing connections between the Illuminati and events in France, even though no direct evidence of such links existed. The conspiracy theories that would dominate discussions of the French Revolution for decades were beginning to take shape. The question of what might have happened if the Illuminati had not been exposed and suppressed is intriguing but ultimately unanswerable. Would it have continued to grow and gain influence? Would internal contradictions have torn it apart even without government intervention? Would it have evolved into something different as circumstances changed? The organization faced significant challenges even before the Bavarian crackdown. The dispute between Weishaupt and Knigge had revealed fundamental disagreements about purpose and methods. The diversity of members meant there was no unified vision of what the Illuminati should achieve. The tension between secrecy and influence was probably unsolvable in the long term. Perhaps the Illuminati would have gradually dissolved or transformed into a conventional Masonic system, even without suppression. Or perhaps it would have adapted and endured, evolving into a lasting network that shaped European development in ways we can only speculate about. What is certain is that the suppression of the Bavarian Illuminati marked not an ending, but a beginning. The organization itself died, but the idea of the Illuminati, the concept that enlightened conspirators might be secretly directing events, was just being born. This idea would prove remarkably durable and adaptable, reappearing in different forms over the following centuries. Each generation would reimagine the Illuminati according to its own fears and fascinations, projecting onto this historical organization contemporary anxieties about power, secrecy, and control. The documents seized in Bavaria would be endlessly reinterpreted, the membership lists endlessly analyzed, the supposed plans endlessly elaborated. From the ashes of Weishaupt's failed organization would arise something far more powerful and persistent, a conspiracy theory that would help shape how millions of people understood history and politics. The French Revolution that erupted in 1789 sent shockwaves through European society that reverberated for decades. What began with demands for moderate reform rapidly escalated into the overthrow of an ancient monarchy, the execution of a king and queen, the transformation of social hierarchies, the persecution of the Catholic Church, and ultimately years of revolutionary violence that horrified observers across Europe. For conservative and religious authorities who had warned about the dangers of Enlightenment rationalism and secret societies, the revolution seemed to confirm their worst predictions. Here was apparent proof that questioning traditional authority led inevitably to chaos and bloodshed. But the revolution's swift success also demanded explanation. How had centuries-old institutions collapsed so quickly? Why had resistance been so ineffective? Many concluded that visible events must have been preceded by invisible preparation, that conspirators had spent years undermining the foundations of French society, waiting for the right moment to strike. The Illuminati, though officially defunct, provided a perfect template for understanding what must have happened. Here was documented evidence that educated men had organized secretly to spread radical ideas, infiltrate institutions, and work toward fundamental transformation of society. The Bavarian organization had been exposed before it could fully execute its plans, but what if similar groups had succeeded elsewhere? What if the Illuminati had not truly disappeared, but had merely gone deeper underground, continuing its work in France and other countries? What if the revolution was not a spontaneous uprising, but the culmination of decades of careful conspiracy? These questions animated a cottage industry of writers who saw in the Illuminati an explanation for the revolutionary upheaval convulsing Europe. The conspiracy theories they produced would prove enormously influential, shaping political discourse for generations and establishing patterns of thinking that persist to the present day. The most influential early conspiracy theorist was Abbé Augustin Barruel, a French Jesuit who had fled France during the Revolution and watched from exile as his homeland descended into what he viewed as madness. Barruel was a natural candidate to see conspiracy everywhere. As a Jesuit, he belonged to an order that had itself been suppressed in 1773, dissolved by the Pope under pressure from European monarchs who found the Jesuits too powerful and independent. Barruel had experienced firsthand how organized opposition could destroy even the most formidable institutions. He had also developed a deep hostility to Enlightenment philosophy, which he blamed for creating the intellectual climate that made revolution possible. In his view, philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau had systematically poisoned French minds against religion and legitimate authority, preparing the ground for violent overthrow of the natural order. Between 1797 and 1799, Barruel published his massive work, Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism, which presented a comprehensive theory of revolutionary conspiracy. According to Barruel, the French Revolution was not a spontaneous response to genuine grievances, but rather the planned outcome of a long conspiracy involving multiple secret societies working in coordination. He identified three main conspiratorial streams that had converged to produce the revolution. First were the philosophical conspirators, the Enlightenment intellectuals, who had deliberately spread atheism and undermined respect for tradition. Second were the Masonic conspirators, the network of lodges that provided organizational structure and attracted influential members. Third were the Illuminati conspirators, who had infiltrated Masonry and directed it toward revolutionary ends. In Barruel's telling, Adam Weishaupt had been the evil genius who transformed disparate elements into a unified revolutionary force. Barruel's narrative was elaborate and detailed, weaving together facts, speculation, and fabrication into a seemingly coherent explanation of events. He claimed that after the Bavarian suppression, the Illuminati had not dissolved but had instead migrated to France, where its members had infiltrated Masonic lodges and revolutionary clubs. He identified various revolutionary leaders as secret Illuminati agents, working to execute the plans that Weishaupt had laid out years earlier. The violence of the revolution, the attacks on the church, the execution of the king, the attempted destruction of traditional morality and social bonds, all of this allegedly followed the Illuminati blueprint. Barruel portrayed the revolution not as a tragic mistake or an understandable if excessive response to genuine problems, but as a deliberate crime against humanity orchestrated by a satanic conspiracy bent on destroying Christian civilization. The evidence Barruel presented for these claims was thin to non-existent. He had read the published Bavarian documents about the Illuminati and extrapolated wildly from them. He found suspicious similarities between Illuminati ideas and revolutionary rhetoric, but these similarities reflected common Enlightenment themes rather than coordinated conspiracy. He identified various revolutionaries as Illuminati members based on little more than the fact that they were Freemasons or had expressed rationalist views. He constructed elaborate chains of connection and influence that had no basis in documented reality. Yet his work was taken seriously by many readers, particularly those already inclined to see the revolution in the worst possible light. For conservatives horrified by revolutionary violence, Baruel offered a comforting explanation that preserved their faith in traditional institutions. The problem was not that the old order had been unjust or incompetent, but rather that it had been sabotaged by evil conspirators who had deceived and manipulated the masses. Almost simultaneously with Baruel's work, a similar conspiracy theory emerged from a very different source. John Robison was a Scottish scientist and professor, not a Catholic priest but a Protestant and Freemason. He had achieved recognition for his work in physics and had been elected to the Royal Society. Unlike Baruel, Robison was not hostile to Enlightenment rationalism or Freemasonry itself, but he had become convinced through correspondence and conversations that continental Freemasonry had been infiltrated and corrupted by radical conspirators, specifically the Illuminati. In 1797, he published Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies, a title that efficiently summarized his thesis. Robison's conspiracy theory differed in some details from Baruel's, but reached similar conclusions. He argued that Weishaupt had created the Illuminati specifically to infiltrate Freemasonry and use its network for revolutionary purposes. He claimed that Illuminati members had successfully taken control of many continental Masonic lodges and had directed them toward atheism and political radicalism. He suggested that the French Revolution had been engineered by this corrupted Masonry, working according to Illuminati principles. Like Baruel, Robison offered more assertion than evidence, connecting dots that may not have been connected and attributing coordination where there was likely only coincidental similarity. But his work carried weight because he was a respected scientist and Freemason, someone without obvious ideological bias, reporting what he presented as disturbing findings from his investigations. The convergence of Baruel's and Robison's theories, produced independently but reaching similar conclusions, convinced many readers that the Illuminati conspiracy must be real. Here were two credible observers from different backgrounds, one a French Catholic priest and the other a Scottish Protestant scientist, both describing the same basic plot. They appeared to corroborate each other, suggesting that the evidence was overwhelming. In reality, both had relied heavily on the same published Bavarian documents, had made similar leaps of interpretation, and had filled gaps in knowledge with speculation. But readers who were predisposed to believe in conspiracy, who needed an explanation for the frightening events in France, found their theories persuasive. The Illuminati conspiracy theory was established, and it would prove remarkably durable. These conspiracy theories served multiple psychological and political functions. For conservatives who had lost power or feared losing it, the Illuminati explanation preserved their sense of moral superiority. They were not being rejected because their ideas were outdated or their rule had been unjust, but rather because they were victims of a sinister conspiracy. For religious authorities confronting secularization and anti-clericalism, the Illuminati theory suggested that the problem was not with institutional religion, but with conspirators who had deliberately spread atheism. For people genuinely confused and frightened by rapid social change, the conspiracy theory offered cognitive clarity. Instead of trying to understand complex social, economic, and political factors that had produced revolution, one could simply blame a secret society. The theory reduced historical complexity to a simple narrative of good versus evil, innocent victims versus calculating villains. The conspiracy theories also had political utility in the struggle against revolutionary ideas. By linking Enlightenment philosophy, Freemasonry, and revolutionary politics to the discredited Illuminati, conservatives could delegitimize all of them simultaneously. Anyone who expressed rationalist views, who questioned traditional authority, who participated in Masonic lodges, who advocated for political reform, could be accused of being an Illuminati agent or dupe. This guilt by association was powerfully effective. It turned philosophical and political disagreements into questions of conspiracy and treason. And It made any criticism of existing institutions potentially evidence of participation in a vast plot. The Illuminati theory thus became a weapon wielded against reform and dissent, a way of placing certain ideas beyond the pale of legitimate discussion. In the United States, the Illuminati conspiracy theory found receptive audiences despite the country's revolutionary origins and general embrace of Enlightenment principles. Federalist politicians and Congregationalist clergy in New England were particularly attracted to the theory because it helped explain political developments they found troubling. The Democratic-Republican opposition led by Thomas Jefferson embraced more radical French revolutionary ideas than the Federalists thought safe. Jeffersonians criticized organized religion and advocated for strict separation of church and state. They opposed what they saw as Federalist attempts to create an American aristocracy and to maintain close ties with Britain. From the Federalist perspective, these Jeffersonian positions seemed dangerously similar to French revolutionary radicalism, which had led to violence and chaos. The Illuminati theory provided an explanation. Perhaps Illuminati agents had infiltrated American political life and were working to spread their atheistic, revolutionary doctrines. In 1798, Jedediah Morse, a prominent Congregationalist minister and fierce Federalist, delivered a sermon claiming that the Illuminati had established themselves in the United States and were working to overthrow the government and destroy Christianity. He pointed to democratic Republican political clubs, to free-thinking societies, to immigration from revolutionary France, all as evidence of Illuminati infiltration. His sermon caused a sensation, with some embracing his warnings while others ridiculed them as paranoid fantasies. The controversy became entangled with partisan politics, with Federalists more likely to believe in the Illuminati conspiracy and Democratic Republicans more likely to dismiss it as propaganda designed to delegitimize political opposition. Thomas Jefferson himself denounced the conspiracy theory as absurd, a position that his critics took as further evidence that he must be an Illuminati agent or sympathizer. The American Illuminati panic faded relatively quickly, particularly after Jefferson's election to the presidency in 1800 did not result in the destruction of Christianity or the overthrow of constitutional government. The failure of predicted catastrophes undermined the conspiracy theory's credibility. But the episode was significant for establishing patterns that would recur throughout American history. Secret societies would repeatedly be accused of plotting against American institutions. Political opponents would be characterized as agents of sinister conspiracies rather than as people with genuinely different views. Foreign influences would be blamed for domestic political developments that some found threatening. The Illuminati Panic of 1798 prefigured later episodes including anti-Masonic hysteria in the 1820s and 1830s, anti-Catholic paranoia in the mid-19th century, and various Red Scares in the 20th century. Back in Europe, the Napoleonic Wars and their aftermath kept conspiracy theories circulating. Napoleon's rise to power, his reorganization of Europe, his conflict with the Catholic Church followed by eventual concordat, his promotion of legal rationalization and meritocracy, all of this could be interpreted through the lens of Illuminati conspiracy. Some theorists claim Napoleon himself was an Illuminati agent, executing their plans for European reorganization. Others argued he was fighting against the Illuminati, which was why they had ultimately brought him down. The flexibility of conspiracy theories, their ability to incorporate any development as confirmation of the underlying thesis, was already evident. Whatever happened could be explained as either the conspiracy succeeding or as reaction against the conspiracy, making the theory unfalsifiable and thus irrefutable to true believers. The Congress of Vienna in 1815, which reorganized Europe after Napoleon's defeat, reinforced conspiracy thinking among reactionaries. The Congress restored monarchical authority and attempted to turn back the clock to pre-revolutionary conditions. Conservative statesmen like Metternich were determined to prevent any recurrence of revolutionary upheaval. This meant suppressing liberal and nationalist movements, censoring publications, infiltrating dissident groups, and maintaining international cooperation among monarchies to respond to any threats. Ironically, the actual conspiracies of the post-Vienna period were conservative ones, with established authorities secretly coordinating to maintain their power against popular demands for representation and reform. But the rhetoric of the Illuminati conspiracy remained useful to these conservatives. They could justify repression by warning that revolutionary secret societies, ultimately descended from the Illuminati, were constantly plotting to overthrow legitimate governments. The 19th century would see waves of actual secret societies forming in Europe, often among liberals, nationalists, and radicals who opposed the conservative order established at Vienna. Organizations like the Carbonari in Italy, Young Ireland, and various revolutionary cells actually did conspire to overthrow governments or achieve national independence. These real conspiracies gave continued plausibility to theories about secret societies directing history, even though the actual revolutionary groups bore little resemblance to the imagined Illuminati. They were usually poorly organized, frequently infiltrated by government spies, ideologically diverse, and rarely successful at achieving their goals. They represented genuine dissent and aspiration for change, not the coordinated international conspiracy that theorists imagined, but their existence allowed conspiracy theories to persist, refreshed, and updated for each generation. The Illuminati conspiracy theory had achieved a kind of immortality by the mid-19th century. The actual organization had been defunct for decades, its members dead or elderly, its specific historical context long past. But the idea of the Illuminati, the notion that a secret society of enlightened conspirators was directing historical events according to a long-term plan, had become a permanent feature of European and American political discourse. It would evolve and adapt, incorporating new fears and anxieties, identifying new supposed agents and goals, but maintaining a basic structure that Barruel and Robison had established. The conspiracy theory had become more historically significant than the conspiracy itself, shaping how people understood politics and power in ways that the actual Bavarian Illuminati never had. This strange afterlife was just beginning, and it would prove far more enduring and influential than Adam Weishaupt could possibly have imagined when he founded his secret society on that spring day in 1776. The 20th century brought the Illuminati conspiracy theory into a modern age where it would find new forms, new audiences, and new technologies for dissemination. The period between the two world wars proved particularly fertile ground for conspiracy thinking as established certainties collapsed and people searched desperately for explanations of catastrophic events. The First World War had destroyed empires and killed millions, shattering the optimistic belief in progress that had characterized the late 19th century. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia terrified Western elites who saw in it the specter of international communism spreading across borders. Economic instability, particularly the Great Depression, created widespread suffering and anger that demanded explanation. In this environment, conspiracy theories offered cognitive refuge, suggesting that chaos was not random but rather the result of deliberate plotting by hidden forces that could, in principle, be identified and opposed. The Illuminati theory adapted to 20th century concerns by incorporating new villains and new supposed goals. In the aftermath of the First World War, conspiracy theorists began linking the Illuminati to international finance, suggesting that a cabal of bankers had engineered the war for profit and were now working to establish economic control over nations. The fact that some prominent bankers were Jewish allowed anti-Semitic elements to be grafted onto the Illuminati theory, creating a toxic synthesis that would have devastating consequences. The infamous forgery, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which purported to document a Jewish conspiracy for world domination, was sometimes linked to or conflated with the Illuminati conspiracy. Both theories shared a similar structure, an ancient secret society of enlightened conspirators working patiently across generations to achieve total power. The merging of these conspiracies in some theorists' minds created an even more comprehensive and sinister narrative. Nestor Webster, a British conspiracy theorist who published extensively in the 1920s and 1930s, exemplified this development. Webster believed that a continuous thread of conspiracy connected the Illuminati to various revolutionary movements throughout history, and ultimately to both Bolshevism and international finance. In her elaborate schema, the Illuminati had not disappeared in 1787, but had continued operating under different names, adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining their core goal of destroying Christian civilization and traditional social order. She claimed to trace their influence through the French Revolution, the 1848 revolutions, the Paris Commune, and finally to the Russian Revolution. For Webster, communism was simply the latest manifestation of the Illuminati program, working to abolish property, family, and religion, just as Weishaupt had supposedly planned. Her work was taken seriously by some readers despite its logical leaps and absence of credible evidence, because it provided a unified explanation for a century of upheaval. In the United States, the post-World War II period saw the Illuminati theory merge with anxieties about the Cold War and domestic subversion. The John Birch Society, founded in 1958 by Robert Welch, promoted a conspiracy theory that bore clear similarities to the old Illuminati narrative even when not invoking that specific name. The Society claimed that a small group of conspirators, which they sometimes called the Insiders, had been working for generations to establish world government under their control. These conspirators allegedly operated through various front organizations, including the Council on Foreign Relations, the United Nations, and even elements of the US government itself. They were supposedly behind both communism and international capitalism, using both systems to advance their goal of global domination. This theory updated the Illuminati narrative for the Cold War era, replacing 18th century Bavarian professors with 20th century technocrats and policy wonks, but maintaining the same basic structure of hidden elites directing history. The paranoid style in American politics, as historian Richard Hofstadter called it, found the Illuminati conspiracy useful for interpreting domestic and international developments that seemed threatening. The civil rights movement, student protests, the counterculture, the sexual revolution, drug use, rock music, all of these could be interpreted as manifestations of conspiracy to undermine traditional American values. If one accepted the premise that hidden conspirators were working to destroy Christian civilization, then any social change that challenged conservative norms could be attributed to their influence. This made the conspiracy theory remarkably flexible and applicable to virtually any development. It also made it unfalsifiable, since any attempt to debunk the theory or present contrary evidence could be dismissed as disinformation spread by the conspirators themselves or by their dupes. A crucial development in the evolution of Illuminati conspiracy theories came in the 1970s with the publication of the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson. This sprawling, surrealist work of fiction deliberately blurred the lines between satire, serious conspiracy theory, and pure absurdist fantasy. The authors had encountered Illuminati conspiracy theories through letters sent to Playboy magazine, where they worked as editors. They were fascinated by the Baroque complexity of these theories and decided to create a novel that would incorporate every conspiracy they could find, weaving them together into an enormous, contradictory, impossible-to-follow narrative. The trilogy included the Illuminati, but also Discordians, the Kennedy assassination, Atlantis, UFOs, occultism, and countless other elements. The tone shifted constantly between deadpan seriousness and obvious absurdity, making it impossible to tell what the authors actually believed, if anything. The Illuminatus trilogy had an unexpected effect on conspiracy culture. Rather than discrediting conspiracy theories through satire, it actually helped popularize and spread them, particularly among younger readers attracted to its countercultural sensibility. Some readers took the novel's elaborate conspiracies seriously, missing or ignoring the satirical elements. Others enjoyed the conspiracy theories as a kind of postmodern game, not necessarily believing them but finding them entertaining and thought-provoking. The trilogy introduced the Illuminati to a generation that knew nothing about the historical Bavarian society, presenting it as a timeless conspiracy involving everything from ancient mysteries to modern power politics. The books also popularized the image of the all-seeing eye and pyramid as Illuminati symbols, linking them to the design on the US dollar bill and suggesting hidden meanings in everyday symbols. This would prove enormously influential in subsequent conspiracy culture. The 1980s and 1990s saw conspiracy theories about the New World Order become increasingly prominent in American political discourse. The phrase New World Order had been used by President George H.W. Bush in speeches about post-Cold War international cooperation, but conspiracy theorists interpreted it as confirmation of long-standing plans for world government. According to this theory, the Illuminati or similar groups had been working for centuries to create a single global government that would eliminate national sovereignty and individual liberty. Various international organizations and agreements were interpreted as steps toward this goal. The United Nations, NATO, the European Union, NAFTA, the International Monetary Fund, all were allegedly part of the conspiracy's infrastructure. The theory attracted support from diverse sources, including religious fundamentalists who saw world government as connected to biblical prophecies about the Antichrist, and militia movements who feared that international forces would soon attempt to disarm Americans and impose tyranny. Conspiracy theorists pointed to alleged symbols and codes as evidence that the Illuminati were hiding their presence in plain sight. The reverse of the Great Seal of the United States, which appears on the dollar bill, became a particular focus. The seal features a pyramid with an eye above it, which conspiracy theorists claimed was an Illuminati symbol. The Latin phrases on the seal, annuit coeptis and novus ordo seclorum, were interpreted as having sinister meanings related to the conspiracy. In reality, the seal had been designed in 1782 by a committee that included Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and its symbolism drew on classical and enlightenment imagery common at the time. The pyramid represented strength and duration, the eye represented providence or divine oversight, and the Latin phrases meant "He has favored our undertakings" and "New Order of the Ages," referring to the founding of the American Republic. But conspiracy theorists insisted that these innocent explanations were covers for hidden Illuminati meanings, that the founders had been secret Illuminati members, and that America had been an Illuminati project from the beginning. This rewriting of American history to incorporate the Illuminati conspiracy required ignoring substantial evidence and embracing speculation, but it proved appealing to many. The theory suggested that American institutions were not what they appeared to be, that beneath the surface of democratic governance existed a hidden power structure that controlled events. This resonated with people who felt alienated from political processes, who believed that voting and civic participation were futile because real decisions were made by unseen elites. The conspiracy theory provided an explanation for why the political system seemed unresponsive to their concerns. It was designed that way, created by conspirators to give an illusion of democracy while maintaining hidden control. This was psychologically satisfying because it externalized blame. The problem was not that their ideas had been democratically rejected or that they were a minority, unable to impose their preferences, but rather that they were victims of conspiracy. The visual language of Illuminati conspiracy theories became increasingly codified during this period. The all-seeing eye, pyramids, owls, specific numbers like 13 or 6666, certain hand gestures, particular architectural features, all were incorporated into a symbolic vocabulary that conspiracy theorists used to identify supposed Illuminati influence. The logic was fundamentally magical thinking. If these symbols appeared in connection with powerful institutions or individuals, it proved Illuminati involvement. The possibility that symbols might have innocent meanings might be coincidental, or might be deliberately used by people who knew about conspiracy theories and wanted to provoke reaction, was generally not considered. Every observation confirmed the theory, nothing contradicted it, and absence of evidence was interpreted as evidence of how well the conspiracy was hidden. Celebrity culture became entangled with Illuminati conspiracy theories in ways that would intensify dramatically in the Internet age. Musicians, actors, and other entertainment figures were accused of being Illuminati members or of selling their souls to the conspiracy in exchange for fame and fortune. The evidence for these accusations typically consisted of supposed symbols in music videos, hand gestures in photographs, references in lyrics that could be interpreted as having occult meanings, and the mere fact of enormous success, which conspiracy theorists assumed must have required supernatural or conspiratorial assistance. These celebrity-focused conspiracy theories were often tinged with resentment and envy. The theorists were suggesting that famous, wealthy, successful people had not earned their positions through talent or effort, but had rather joined a conspiracy and been rewarded for their loyalty. This allowed conspiracy believers to maintain their self-esteem by redefining success as moral compromise. The conspiracy theories also incorporated elements of Satanism and occultism that had not been prominent in earlier versions. The original Bavarian Illuminati had been rationalist and enlightenment-oriented, explicitly opposed to supernatural beliefs and religious mysticism. But 20th century conspiracy theorists increasingly portrayed the Illuminati as devil worshippers, practitioners of dark magic, and followers of ancient pagan religions. This development reflected the influence of fundamentalist Christian conspiracy theorists who interpreted any secret society as inherently demonic. It also made the conspiracy more frightening and absolute. If the Illuminati were simply wealthy elites pursuing power through mundane means, that was one thing. But if they were actually serving Satan and practicing human sacrifice, the stakes were far higher, and opposition to them became a cosmic battle between good and evil. The satanic panic of the 1980s and early 1990s, during which numerous false accusations of ritual abuse were made and believed, showed how conspiracy theories could lead to real harm. People were imprisoned based on fantastical accusations that supposedly revealed vast networks of Satanists operating in daycare centers and other institutions. The claims were eventually debunked, and many convictions were overturned, but the episode demonstrated the damage that conspiracy thinking could inflict. It also showed how conspiracy theories could be remarkably resistant to evidence. Even after the satanic abuse claims were thoroughly discredited, many believers maintained their faith in the conspiracy, simply adjusting the theory to explain why the evidence had not been found or claiming that the debunking itself was part of the cover-up. As the 20th century ended, Illuminati conspiracy theories had become a permanent feature of popular culture and fringe politics. They appeared in movies, television shows, novels, and music. Some of these cultural products took the theories seriously, others used them as entertaining plot devices, and still others satirized them. But all of this cultural presence kept the Illuminati concept alive and familiar. People who had never read Barruel or Robison, who knew nothing about the historical Bavarian society, nonetheless had opinions about the Illuminati because the idea had become part of the cultural landscape. The Internet was about to dramatically accelerate this process, creating new ways for conspiracy theories to spread and mutate, new communities of believers to form, and new synthesized versions of the theory to emerge. The Illuminati was entering its most vigorous phase yet, becoming more influential in the 21st century than it had ever been in the 18th. The language of symbols has always held a peculiar power over human imagination. Throughout history, simple images have carried complex meanings, communicated ideas that transcended words, and signaled membership in communities or adherence to particular beliefs. The cross, the crescent, the star, the flag. These symbols condense identity and ideology into visual form that can be instantly recognized and emotionally processed. When conspiracy theorists began attributing hidden meanings to everyday symbols, claiming that the Illuminati communicated through secret imagery embedded in currency, architecture, corporate logos, and entertainment, they were tapping into this ancient human tendency to seek meaning in images, but they were also engaging in a particular kind of interpretive practice that tells us more about the interpreters than about any actual conspiracy. The story of Illuminati symbolism is really a story about how humans construct meaning, how anxiety finds expression in pattern recognition, and how symbols that began with innocent or even opposite meanings can be transformed into something sinister through repetition and reinterpretation. The all-seeing eye, perhaps the most iconic symbol associated with Illuminati conspiracy theories, has a long history that predates the Bavarian society by millennia. Eyes have held symbolic significance across cultures and religions, representing divine oversight, wisdom, protection, or surveillance depending on context. In ancient Egypt, the Eye of Horus was an amulet signifying protection and royal power. In Christianity, the eye within a triangle came to represent the Holy Trinity and God's omniscience. During the Renaissance and Enlightenment, the symbol was frequently used to represent divine providence, the concept that God watches over human affairs and guides them toward proper ends. This meaning was widespread in the 18th century, appearing in churches, on religious texts, and in various forms of art and decoration. There is no evidence that the historical Illuminati used this symbol as their emblem or insignia. The connection between the all-seeing eye and the Illuminati appears to have been largely invented by later conspiracy theorists, who needed a visual shorthand for their theories. The eye's association with the Illuminati became cemented through its appearance on the Great Seal of the United States, specifically on the reverse design that appears on the $1 bill. The seal shows a pyramid with 13 steps, unfinished at the top, with an eye surrounded by rays of light floating above the pyramid within a triangle. Above this appears the Latin phrase "annuit coeptis," and below the pyramid is inscribed Novus Ordo Seclorum, along with the date 1776 in Roman numerals. To conspiracy theorists, this design seems laden with Illuminati significance. The eye represents the all-seeing Illuminati leadership. The unfinished pyramid represents their incomplete work of establishing world domination. The date 1776 connects to the founding of the Illuminati in May of that year. The phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum supposedly means New World Order, revealing the conspiracy's ultimate goal. The 13 steps relate to 13 Illuminati bloodlines or to occult numerology. Each element seems to confirm that America was founded as an Illuminati project and that the conspiracy has been hiding in plain sight for over 2 centuries. The reality is far more mundane and far better documented. The Great Seal was designed by a committee that included Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson in 1776, with the final version adopted in 1782 after input from multiple designers. The symbolism was carefully explained by its creators and reflected common Enlightenment imagery rather than any secret conspiracy. The pyramid was chosen to represent strength and duration, echoing the ancient pyramids that had endured for millennia. Its unfinished state represented that America's work was not yet complete, that the nation was still building and growing. The 13 steps represented the 13 original states, nothing more esoteric than that. The eye above the pyramid symbolized divine providence watching over the new nation, a common religious motif of the era. The phrase annuit coeptis came from the poet Virgil and meant "he has favored our undertakings," with the "he" referring to God. Novus Ordo Seclorum also came from Virgil and meant new order of the ages, referring to the new American era of republican government, not to world government or conspiracy. The date 1776 appears because that is when American independence was declared, several months before the Illuminati was founded in Bavaria. The fact that both the Declaration of Independence and the founding of the Illuminati occurred in the same year is pure coincidence, given that the American founders had no knowledge of Weishaupt's activities. The Great Seal was not designed by Illuminati members, did not contain hidden Illuminati symbols, and was not part of any conspiracy. It was a straightforward patriotic emblem using classical and religious imagery that was entirely conventional for its time. But conspiracy theorists, working backward from the assumption that the Illuminati must have influenced American founding, reinterpreted every element to fit their preconceived narrative. This approach to symbols, reading hidden meanings into innocent designs, would become characteristic of Illuminati conspiracy culture. The pyramid itself became another key symbol in the conspiracy lexicon, despite having no documented connection to the historical Illuminati. Pyramids appear in conspiracy theories for several reasons. Their ancient origins suggest hidden knowledge from lost civilizations. Their geometric perfection implies sophisticated understanding. Their use as tombs and their association with Egyptian religion gives them an air of mystery and death. And, most importantly, pyramids are hierarchical structures with a small point at the top and a broad base below, which serves as a perfect metaphor for conspiracy theories about elite control. Conspiracy theorists describe the Illuminati power structure as a pyramid with the masses at the bottom knowing nothing, layers of initiated members above knowing progressively more, and a tiny elite at the apex possessing complete knowledge and control. This pyramidal conception of conspiracy appears constantly in conspiracy literature and imagery, even though actual organizations rarely function this way, and the historical Illuminati, while hierarchical, was not pyramid-shaped in any literal sense. Numbers acquired supposed Illuminati significance through a combination of numerology, religious symbolism, and pattern-seeking behavior. The number 13 appears frequently in conspiracy theories because it has 13 steps in the pyramid on the Great Seal. There were 13 original states, and 13 has associations with both Christianity and occultism. Conspiracy theorists find 13s everywhere, counting windows in buildings, letters in names or elements in corporate logos, and claiming each instance proves Illuminati involvement. The number 666, the biblical number of the beast, is discovered through elaborate calculations that assign numerical values to letters and add them up to reveal hidden meanings. The number 33 is claimed to be significant because of its importance in Scottish Rite Freemasonry. These numbers are found through motivated reasoning, where theorists search until they find the number they expect and then declare victory, ignoring the countless other numbers that appear just as frequently but lack supposed occult significance. Owls became associated with the Illuminati partly through their traditional symbolism of wisdom and connection to the goddess Minerva, after whom one of the Illuminati degrees was named. Conspiracy theorists claim that owl imagery in architecture or design proves Illuminati presence. The Bohemian Club, an elite social organization in California, uses an owl as its emblem and meets in a redwood grove, which has generated conspiracy theories about powerful men conducting pagan rituals. The reality is that the owl was chosen as a symbol of wisdom, and the club, while indeed a gathering place for wealthy and influential men, is fundamentally a social organization rather than a command center for world domination. But in conspiracy theory, any gathering of elites becomes suspect, any symbol becomes evidence, and any privacy becomes proof of sinister activity. Hand gestures and body language also entered the conspiracy vocabulary, with certain poses interpreted as Illuminati signs. Covering one eye in photographs supposedly signals membership or allegiance. Making a triangle with the hands allegedly represents the pyramid symbol. The OK sign, made with thumb and forefinger, became a supposed 666 symbol in some interpretations. The devil horns hand gesture, popular in rock music, was claimed to be an Illuminati or satanic symbol. The problem with this symbolic interpretation is that hand gestures have multiple meanings across contexts and cultures. People cover one eye for photographic effect, make triangles because they saw others do it or think it looks cool, and use hand gestures without any occult intention. But conspiracy theorists interpret every gesture as deliberate communication, transforming ordinary behavior into evidence of conspiracy. This reveals more about the theorists' need to find hidden messages than about any actual secret society communication. Architecture became another supposed location for hidden Illuminati symbols. Washington, D.C. attracted particular attention, with conspiracy theorists claiming that the city's street layout contained occult symbolism when viewed from above. The pentagram, the compass, and square of Freemasonry and various geometric patterns were allegedly encoded in the city plan. Some of these patterns do exist if you draw lines connecting certain streets and buildings, but they are either coincidental or reflect aesthetic principles common in city planning rather than occult conspiracy. Pierre L'Enfant designed the city with Baroque influences, creating dramatic vistas and monumental spaces typical of European capital cities. Finding geometric patterns in a planned city with a grid layout and diagonal avenues is not difficult if you are looking for them, but it does not prove anything about secret societies. Corporate logos provided an endless source of supposed Illuminati symbols for conspiracy theorists. The Columbia Broadcasting System's eye logo was claimed to be an Illuminati all-seeing eye. The Procter & Gamble logo, which originally featured a man in the moon surrounded by stars, generated persistent rumors that it contained satanic symbolism, forcing the company to eventually redesign it. The Apple computer logo, a bitten apple, was interpreted as referring to forbidden knowledge from the Garden of Eden. The Nike swoosh, the Target bullseye, the Pepsi globe, the Starbucks siren, virtually every major corporate logo has been subjected to conspiracy interpretation at some point. The reality is that logos are designed to be memorable and visually appealing, often drawing on archetypal imagery that has broad cultural resonance. Designers are not encoding secret society messages, but rather trying to create effective branding. When conspiracy theorists find supposed hidden meanings, they are engaging in a practice called pareidolia, seeing patterns where none were intended. The entertainment industry became particularly associated with Illuminati symbolism in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Music videos, album covers, movie posters, and celebrity photographs were scrutinized for supposed Illuminati signs. The logic was that the Illuminati controlled the entertainment industry and required their celebrity servants to display symbols acknowledging their allegiance. Therefore, any appearance of eyes, pyramids, triangles, certain colors, or specific hand gestures must be deliberate Illuminati communication. This interpretation ignored the simpler explanation that artists and designers, aware of Illuminati conspiracy theories, sometimes deliberately incorporated such imagery either to provoke reaction, to seem mysterious and edgy, or simply as ironic commentary. Using supposed Illuminati symbols became fashionable in popular culture, creating a feedback loop where conspiracy theorists pointed to the symbols as proof, while artists used them more frequently because they generated attention. Madonna's music videos were frequently cited as containing Illuminati imagery, with conspiracy theorists analyzing every costume, gesture, and visual element for hidden meanings. Jay-Z's frequent use of the triangle hand gesture was interpreted as an Illuminati sign, though he claimed it represented his Rockefeller Records logo. Beyoncé, Lady Gaga, Rihanna, Katy Perry, and numerous other artists had their work subjected to conspiracy interpretation. The theorists seemed unable to accept that these were artistic choices made for aesthetic or commercial reasons rather than occult communication. The irony was that by creating such detailed symbolic systems and publicizing them widely, conspiracy theorists were teaching artists exactly which symbols would provoke the most intense reactions, thereby ensuring those symbols appeared more frequently. which theorists then took as confirmation of their theories. The symbology of Illuminati conspiracy theories reveals much about how meaning is constructed and contested. Symbols do not have inherent fixed meanings, but rather acquire significance through social and cultural processes. The all-seeing eye meant divine providence in the 18th century, but conspiracy culture has successfully redefined it to suggest sinister surveillance and hidden control for many people in the 21st century. This redefinition happens through repetition and through association. When the same symbols are repeatedly linked to conspiracy narratives, those associations become automatic for people immersed in conspiracy culture. The symbol becomes shorthand for an entire worldview, a way of identifying fellow believers and signaling opposition to supposed hidden power. The focus on symbols also serves psychological functions for conspiracy believers. It transforms the overwhelming complexity of modern society into something that can be grasped and understood, instead of trying to comprehend economic systems, technological change, cultural evolution, and political processes through their actual complex mechanisms. Conspiracy theorists can simply identify symbols and declare the Illuminati did this. It provides a sense of special knowledge of seeing what others miss. When conspiracy theorists spot a supposed Illuminati symbol that ordinary people walk past without noticing, they feel empowered and enlightened. They possess secret knowledge that makes them superior to the sleeping masses who remain unaware of the truth hiding in plain sight. This satisfies psychological needs for status and significance that may not be met through conventional channels. The symbolic vocabulary continues to expand as new images are incorporated into conspiracy theories. Peace signs, infinity symbols, spirals, checkerboard patterns, masks, butterflies, even specific colors like red and black or purple and gold, all have been assigned supposed Illuminati meanings by various conspiracy theorists. The system has become so elaborate and comprehensive that virtually any visual element can be interpreted as evidence of conspiracy. This makes the theory unfalsifiable in practice. If symbols appear, they prove Illuminati presence. If symbols do not appear, it proves the conspiracy is being especially careful to hide. The symbolic interpretation has become a lens through which true believers view the entire visual landscape, transforming the ordinary world into a field of hidden messages accessible only to those initiated into conspiracy knowledge. This is a form of magical thinking, treating symbols as possessing inherent power rather than as human constructions with historically contingent meanings. But it is enormously appealing to those seeking order and significance in what otherwise seems like a chaotic and indifferent universe. The internet transformed conspiracy theories in ways that would have been unimaginable even a few decades earlier. Before digital connectivity, spreading conspiracy theories required books, pamphlets, newsletters, lectures, and word of mouth. These methods limited reach and speed of dissemination. A conspiracy theorist writing in the 1970s might spend years researching and writing a book, find a publisher willing to take the risk, and then hope enough people would purchase and read it to make an impact. The internet changed everything. Suddenly, anyone with a computer and internet connection could publish their theories instantly to a global audience at virtually no cost. Forums, websites, blogs, and eventually social media platforms provided unlimited space for conspiracy content. The barriers to entry collapsed, democratizing conspiracy theory production in ways that greatly amplified both its reach and its consequences. Others were barely coherent collections of speculation and paranoia, but all benefited from the Internet's fundamental characteristic. It treated all content equally. A well-researched academic article and a conspiracy theory rant appeared in search results side by side with no obvious markers distinguishing credible information from nonsense. Users had to evaluate content themselves, and many lacked the skills or inclination to do so effectively. Discussion forums and message boards created communities where conspiracy believers could find each other and reinforce their shared worldviews. Before the internet, a person interested in Illuminati conspiracies might feel isolated, unable to find others who shared their concerns. The internet solved this problem, connecting geographically dispersed individuals into virtual communities. These communities developed their own norms, shared vocabulary, and systems for evaluating claims. A newcomer entering these spaces would find established narratives, lengthy debates about details, and social pressure to accept certain core beliefs. The communities also developed mechanisms for dealing with skeptics and critics, typically dismissing them as either ignorant dupes who had not done proper research or as active disinformation agents working for the conspiracy itself. This created echo chambers where conspiracy beliefs were constantly reinforced and rarely seriously challenged. YouTube, launched in 2006, proved to be particularly transformative for conspiracy culture. Video is a powerful medium, more emotionally engaging than text, and capable of creating stronger impressions. Conspiracy theorists quickly recognized YouTube's potential and began producing documentary-style videos that presented conspiracy theories with professional-looking graphics, dramatic music, and authoritative-sounding narration. These videos could take viewers on guided tours through conspiracy claims, showing supposed evidence through carefully selected images and video clips, interpreting symbols, connecting dots, and building to alarming conclusions. The format was perfectly suited to conspiracy theories because it allowed creators to control information flow, deciding exactly what viewers would see and in what order, creating a persuasive experience that was harder to resist than reading text that allowed for pausing and reflection. Some YouTube conspiracy videos achieved viral success, accumulating millions of views and introducing Illuminati theories to audiences who had never encountered them before. Videos with titles like Illuminati Exposed, Secret Societies Rule the World, or Celebrity Illuminati Proof attracted curious viewers who might have initially approached the content with skepticism but found themselves drawn in by the presentation. The videos typically employed rhetorical techniques that made their claims seem more credible than they were. They cited sources, even if those sources were other conspiracy theorists or misinterpreted legitimate research. They showed documents, even if those documents were taken out of context or did not actually prove what was claimed. They used expert-sounding language and presented information with confidence that implied careful investigation rather than speculation. The algorithmic recommendation systems that YouTube and other platforms employed to increase user engagement had the unintended effect of radicalizing users toward more extreme conspiracy beliefs. The algorithms learned that users who watched one conspiracy video were likely to watch others, so they recommended increasingly extreme content to keep users engaged. Someone who initially watched a video about Illuminati symbolism in music videos might be recommended videos about satanic ritual abuse, then videos about child trafficking conspiracies, then videos about global depopulation plans, each step taking them deeper into conspiracy thinking. The algorithms optimized for watch time and engagement, not for truth or user well-being, and conspiracy content was highly engaging because it provoked strong emotions and encouraged extended viewing to learn more about supposed threats. Social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and later Instagram and TikTok further accelerated conspiracy theory spread. These platforms were designed for rapid sharing, and conspiracy content proved highly shareable. A dramatic claim about Illuminati control, a startling image highlighting supposed symbols, a video clip showing a celebrity making a gesture interpreted as an Illuminati sign, these could be shared with a click and would spread through networks of friends and followers. The social endorsement implied by sharing was powerful. When a friend or family member shared conspiracy content, it carried more weight than if the same content were encountered on a random website. Social media transformed conspiracy theories from something believed by isolated individuals into a social phenomenon, where people participated in conspiracy culture partly to bond with others in their network. The like, share, and comment features on social media platforms created feedback loops that rewarded conspiracy content. Posts that generated strong reactions received more visibility through platform algorithms. Conspiracy theories, by their nature, provoked strong reactions, either agreement from believers or outrage from skeptics, and both types of engagement boosted visibility. Content creators learned to craft conspiracy posts that would maximize engagement, using provocative images, alarming headlines, and emotional appeals. The truth or falsity of the content mattered less than its ability to generate reactions. This created perverse incentives where accuracy was sacrificed for virality, and where moderate, nuanced perspectives were drowned out by extreme, sensational claims. The celebrity-focused Illuminati theories that had existed in previous decades exploded in the social media era. Every award show, music video, public appearance, or social media post by a major celebrity was scrutinized by conspiracy theorists searching for Illuminati signs. Screenshots, video clips, and images were circulated with annotations highlighting supposed symbols or suspicious elements. The death of any celebrity generated conspiracy theories about Illuminati sacrifice. Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Prince, Amy Winehouse, and many others had their deaths attributed to the Illuminati by conspiracy theorists who claimed these artists had tried to escape or expose the conspiracy and were killed as punishment. These theories were disrespectful to the deceased and their families, but they proliferated anyway because they fit the narrative and generated engagement. Living celebrities were constantly accused of being Illuminati members based on the flimsiest evidence. Beyoncé became a particular target, with conspiracy theorists analyzing every aspect of her performances, music videos, and public appearances for supposed Illuminati symbolism. Her Super Bowl halftime show performances generated days of conspiracy analysis. Her hand gestures, her costumes, her choreography, even her daughter's name, all were subjected to conspiracy interpretation. Some celebrities addressed these accusations directly, either denying them seriously or mocking them with humor. Others ignored them, perhaps recognizing that engaging with conspiracy theories often amplifies them. A few seemed to deliberately play with the accusations, incorporating more supposed Illuminati imagery into their work, which theorists took as confirmation, while the celebrities likely viewed it as trolling their accusers. The music industry became thoroughly entangled with Illuminati conspiracy theories in the digital age. Hip-hop culture in particular attracted conspiracy attention, with prominent rappers frequently accused of Illuminati membership. Jay-Z faced persistent accusations, partly because of his commercial success and partly because of his use of pyramid and eye imagery in his branding. He occasionally referenced the accusations in his lyrics, at times seeming to embrace the mystique, while at other times dismissing the theories as absurd. Kanye West's public statements and erratic behavior generated conspiracy theories interpreting his actions as evidence of mind control or Illuminati programming. The conspiratorial interpretation of hip-hop extended to claims that the entire genre had been infiltrated by the Illuminati to promote destructive behaviors and messages to black communities, a theory that was both patronizing and grounded in older racist anxieties about black cultural influence. The anonymity and pseudonymity available online allowed conspiracy theories to develop and spread in new ways. Anonymous accounts could make wild claims without accountability. Supposed insiders or whistleblowers could share alleged secrets about Illuminati operations without revealing their identities, making verification impossible, but also making their claims difficult to dismiss. The anonymous forum culture of sites like 4chan became incubators for conspiracy theories that would later spread to more mainstream platforms. These spaces valued transgression and deliberately cultivated an anything-goes atmosphere where outrageous claims were rewarded with attention. Conspiracy theories developed in these spaces often combined genuine belief with ironic detachment, making it difficult to determine how seriously participants actually took the theories they promoted. QAnon, which emerged in 2017, represented a synthesis of numerous conspiracy theories, including Illuminati narratives, updated for the digital age. The conspiracy claimed that a secret group of elites, often referred to as the deep state or the cabal, controlled the world and engaged in horrific crimes including child trafficking and ritual abuse. These elites allegedly included politicians, celebrities, business leaders, and others in powerful positions. An anonymous figure known as Q, claiming to be a high-level government insider, posted cryptic messages on anonymous message boards that followers would decode and interpret. The conspiracy incorporated elements from Illuminati theories, satanic panic narratives, anti-Semitic tropes, and partisan political grievances into a comprehensive worldview that explained everything as part of an ancient struggle between good and evil forces. QAnon demonstrated how conspiracy theories could mobilize real-world action in the digital age. Followers organized online but also attended political rallies, engaged in street activism, and in some cases committed violent acts. The January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol included numerous QAnon believers who thought they were stopping the conspiracy's plans. The movement showed that internet conspiracy theories were not merely entertainment or harmless speculation, but could have serious consequences. Social media platforms eventually began removing QAnon content and banning prominent accounts, but this was interpreted by believers as proof of the conspiracy's power and determination to silence the truth. The banning also scattered the movement across multiple platforms, making it harder to monitor, but also potentially harder to coordinate. The COVID-19 pandemic created conditions for explosive growth in conspiracy theories. The uncertainty, fear, and rapid changes in information as scientists learned about the novel virus created an environment where conspiracy theories could flourish. Illuminati narratives were quickly adapted to explain the pandemic. Some theorists claimed the virus had been deliberately released by elites as part of a depopulation agenda. Others said the pandemic was a hoax designed to justify lockdowns that would establish totalitarian control. Vaccines were portrayed as containing microchips for surveillance or as tools for genetic modification. Bill Gates, because of his foundation's work on vaccines and disease prevention, became a central villain in pandemic conspiracy theories, accused of being an Illuminati leader using the virus to advance plans for global domination. The speed with which pandemic conspiracy theories spread online demonstrated both the power and the danger of digital conspiracy culture. Misinformation about treatments, prevention, and the nature of the virus reached millions within hours. Some people made health decisions based on conspiracy theories rather than medical advice, refusing masks or vaccines, or trying dangerous, unproven treatments. The conspiracy theories also fueled real-world protests and violence, with attacks on telecommunications infrastructure blamed for spreading the virus, or on healthcare workers accused of being part of the conspiracy. The pandemic showed that conspiracy theories were not merely intellectual curiosities, but could directly threaten public health and safety. Platform responses to conspiracy content have been inconsistent and controversial. Companies initially took a hands-off approach, citing free speech principles and claiming to be neutral platforms rather than publishers. But as the consequences of conspiracy theories became more apparent, particularly regarding vaccine misinformation and election fraud claims, platforms began taking more aggressive action. YouTube changed its recommendation algorithm to reduce conspiracy content. Facebook and Twitter added fact-checking labels and removed some conspiracy accounts. These actions provoked accusations of censorship from conspiracy communities who moved to alternative platforms with less moderation like Telegram, Parler, and Gab. The migration to these alternative platforms created even more intense echo chambers where conspiracy beliefs could be reinforced without any contrary perspectives. The fragmentation of online spaces has made conspiracy culture harder to understand and track. In the early internet era, conspiracy theories existed on relatively few websites and forums that researchers could monitor. Today, conspiracy content is scattered across dozens of platforms, private messaging apps, closed groups, and encrypted channels. Conspiracy believers have become more sophisticated about avoiding platform moderation, using coded language, euphemisms, and private spaces to discuss their theories. They have also become more suspicious of mainstream platforms and information sources, viewing them as compromised by the conspiracy. This creates a bifurcation where conspiracy believers and mainstream society increasingly occupy separate information ecosystems with minimal overlap, making dialogue and persuasion extremely difficult. The digital age has transformed the Illuminati from a historical footnote into a ubiquitous presence in online culture. Young people growing up with the internet encounter Illuminati theories constantly, whether through conspiracy content, through ironic memes and jokes, or through celebrities and artists deliberately playing with the imagery. For many, the Illuminati is not a serious belief but a cultural reference point, something that exists on the border between entertainment and belief. But for others, particularly those drawn deeper into conspiracy culture through algorithmic recommendations and community reinforcement, the Illuminati is very real, a powerful force shaping world events that must be exposed and opposed. The internet has not resolved the question of whether the Illuminati exists or what they might be doing. Instead, it has created an environment where both belief and skepticism can find unlimited support, where any question can be answered in multiple contradictory ways, and where the line between reality and fantasy becomes increasingly blurred. Understanding why people believe in conspiracy theories like the Illuminati requires examining the fundamental architecture of human cognition and the psychological needs that such beliefs satisfy. The human mind did not evolve to passively receive accurate information about the world, but rather to make quick judgments that enhanced survival in ancestral environments. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, constantly scanning for meaningful connections and relationships that might indicate threats or opportunities. This tendency served our ancestors well when recognizing that rustling in the grass might mean a predator, or that certain cloud patterns might predict rain. But in modern complex societies flooded with information, this same pattern recognition ability can lead us to see connections that do not actually exist, to impose order on randomness and to construct elaborate explanatory frameworks that feel true even when they diverge significantly from reality. One of the most important cognitive processes underlying conspiracy belief is agency detection. Humans have a strong tendency to attribute events to intentional agents rather than to impersonal forces or chance. This makes evolutionary sense because the cost of failing to detect an agent that is present, such as a predator or enemy, was historically much higher than the cost of falsely detecting an agent that is absent. Our ancestors, who assumed every sound in the darkness was a threat, survived more often than those who assumed most sounds were meaningless. This bias toward detecting agency persists in modern humans, leading us to assume that significant events must have significant causes and that those causes must be intentional actions by thinking agents rather than accidents, coincidences, or the complex interaction of impersonal forces. When something bad happens, particularly something that affects us directly or frightens us, our immediate impulse is to ask, who did this and why? Not to analyze whether it might have been a predictable outcome of systemic factors or simply bad luck. Conspiracy theories satisfy this need for agency by providing clear villains who can be blamed for negative events. Rather than accepting that a pandemic emerged through natural processes involving human-animal contact and viral mutation, conspiracy theories attribute it to deliberate release by elites. Rather than acknowledging that economic inequality results from complex interactions of policy, technology, globalization, and countless individual decisions, conspiracy theories blame it on intentional manipulation by the Illuminati. Rather than understanding that social change occurs through the gradual shifting of cultural norms and values across populations, conspiracy theories attribute it to organized subversion by secret societies. In each case, the conspiracy theory replaces uncomfortable complexity and uncertainty with satisfying clarity. There are villains, they have intentions, they can be identified and opposed. This feels psychologically manageable in a way that abstract systemic explanations do not. The related phenomenon of proportionality bias also contributes to conspiracy thinking. People tend to believe that big events must have big causes. When something momentous happens, such as a president being assassinated, a major terrorist attack, or a global pandemic, our intuition rebels against small or mundane explanations. The idea that a lone gunman with personal grievances killed President Kennedy seems disproportionate to the enormous historical impact of his death. The idea that a few terrorists with box cutters could change American foreign policy and trigger decades of conflict seems insufficient. The idea that a virus jumping from animals to humans in a wet market could kill millions and transform global society seems anticlimactic. Conspiracy theories restore proportionality by proposing causes that match the magnitude of the effects. The president was killed by a vast conspiracy involving intelligence agencies, the mafia, or foreign governments. The terrorist attack was orchestrated by elements within the US government as a false flag operation. The pandemic was deliberately released by a global elite implementing long-planned population control measures. These explanations feel more appropriate to the scale of the events they are explaining. Pattern recognition, when unconstrained by rigorous methodology, can produce the illusion of meaningful connections in random or unrelated data. This is related to the phenomenon of apophenia, the tendency to perceive patterns in random information. When conspiracy theorists examine the world searching for evidence of Illuminati influence, they find patterns everywhere because they are primed to see them. A celebrity makes a hand gesture and it matches one supposedly used by the Illuminati. A building has architectural features that resemble occult symbols. The numbers in a date add up to 13. The letters in a name can be rearranged to spell something sinister. Each of these patterns seems significant when encountered, and when dozens or hundreds of such patterns are accumulated, they create a compelling impression of coordinated conspiracy. The conspiracy theorist does not realize they are engaging in a biased search, noticing patterns that confirm their theory while ignoring the vastly larger number of instances where the expected patterns do not appear. Confirmation bias, the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in ways that confirm pre-existing beliefs, is perhaps the most important cognitive bias sustaining conspiracy theories. Once someone has adopted the basic premise that the Illuminati exists and controls world events, every piece of information they encounter will be filtered through this lens. News stories about political decisions become evidence of Illuminati manipulation. Celebrity behavior becomes evidence of Illuminati membership. Economic trends become evidence of Illuminati planning. Contradictory evidence is either ignored, dismissed as disinformation, or reinterpreted to fit the theory. A lack of evidence for the conspiracy becomes evidence of how well the conspiracy is hidden. Failed predictions are explained away through ad hoc modifications to the theory rather than being taken as disconfirmation. This makes conspiracy theories essentially unfalsifiable, immune to evidence in a way that genuine scientific or historical claims are not. The sense of having special knowledge contributes significantly to conspiracy beliefs' appeal. In a world where most people feel powerless and insignificant, believing in conspiracy theories provides a form of empowerment. The conspiracy believer possesses secret knowledge that most people lack. They have seen through the lies that fool the masses. They understand what is really happening while others remain asleep or blind. This creates a sense of superiority and importance that may not be available through conventional channels. Someone who is economically unsuccessful, socially marginalized, or educationally limited can still feel intellectually superior to even the most conventionally accomplished person by claiming to understand the hidden forces that really control the world. The conspiracy theory becomes a form of status compensation, providing psychological rewards that the social system does not offer. The social dimension of conspiracy belief is crucial for understanding its persistence. Humans are intensely social creatures whose beliefs and attitudes are heavily influenced by their social networks. When someone joins a conspiracy community, they are not merely adopting a set of factual claims, but are entering a social world with its own norms, values, and relationships. The community provides belonging, recognition, and social support. Other members validate one's beliefs and experiences. Shared investigation of conspiracy claims creates bonds similar to those formed by any group pursuing a common project. Leaving the conspiracy community or abandoning conspiracy beliefs means losing these social connections and facing potential rejection by people who have become friends or even family. This makes it psychologically costly to change one's mind, even if evidence accumulates against the conspiracy theory. The social costs of abandoning belief can outweigh the intellectual benefits of accepting more accurate information. Conspiracy theories also serve as anxiety management tools for people facing uncertainty and threats they feel unable to control. The modern world is genuinely complex and often frightening. Climate change, economic instability, technological disruption, political polarization, pandemics, terrorism. These are real problems without simple solutions. For many people, particularly those who feel they lack power or influence over these developments, the uncertainty and lack of control is deeply distressing. Conspiracy theories reduce this anxiety by providing explanations and by suggesting that the threats, while serious, are at least comprehensible and potentially defeatable if only the conspirators can be exposed and stopped. There is something perversely comforting about believing that a small group of humans is causing the problems, rather than believing that the problems emerge from complex systems that no one fully understands or controls. At least conspirators can be fought, whereas systemic problems seem overwhelming. The need for closure and discomfort with ambiguity varies across individuals, and those who score high on need for cognitive closure are more susceptible to conspiracy theories. These individuals find uncertainty psychologically painful and are motivated to resolve it quickly, even if that means accepting explanations that are not well supported. They prefer clear, definitive answers over nuanced, conditional ones. Conspiracy theories provide exactly this kind of closure, offering comprehensive explanations that resolve uncertainty decisively. Rather than accepting that some events have multiple contributing causes that are difficult to disentangle, that some questions remain unanswered, that some patterns are merely coincidental, the conspiracy theory provides a unified explanation that accounts for everything. This completeness is intellectually satisfying in a way that more modest, limited explanations are not. Distrust of authority and institutions is both a cause and a consequence of conspiracy belief. People who have experienced betrayal, discrimination, or mistreatment by institutions are more likely to believe that those institutions are fundamentally corrupt and conspiratorial. This is particularly true for historically marginalized groups who have legitimate reasons to distrust government, medical establishments, law enforcement, and other authorities. The Tuskegee syphilis study, in which the U.S. government deliberately left black men untreated to study disease progression, provides a real historical example of medical conspiracy that makes later conspiracy theories about medical experimentation more plausible to some communities. Similarly, revelations about CIA mind control experiments, FBI surveillance of civil rights leaders, and corporate cover-ups of product dangers demonstrate that conspiracies do sometimes exist, even if they rarely match the scope and coordination that conspiracy theories attribute to them. However, conspiracy beliefs also actively erode trust in institutions, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Someone who believes in Illuminati conspiracies will interpret any official statement or mainstream news report as potentially compromised by the conspiracy. This leads them to seek alternative information sources that may be even less reliable, but that confirm their suspicions. As they become more immersed in conspiracy thinking, their trust in conventional institutions declines further, making them more receptive to even more extreme conspiracy claims. Eventually, they may reach a point where they believe virtually nothing from mainstream sources and trust only information from conspiracy communities. This creates profound challenges for public health, democratic governance, and social cohesion, as a segment of the population becomes effectively unreachable through normal information channels. The role of intuition versus analytical thinking in conspiracy belief has been studied by psychologists who have found that people who rely more heavily on intuitive, gut-feeling approaches to reasoning are more susceptible to conspiracy theories than those who engage in more effortful, analytical thinking. This does not mean that conspiracy believers are less intelligent, but rather that they are using different cognitive styles. Analytical thinking involves carefully evaluating evidence, considering alternative explanations, checking claims against known facts, and revising beliefs when new information emerges. Intuitive thinking involves going with initial impressions, trusting feelings about what seems true, and relying on heuristics or mental shortcuts. Both styles have advantages in different contexts, but intuitive thinking is more vulnerable to the kinds of biases that sustain conspiracy beliefs. When a conspiracy theory feels true, when it resonates emotionally and seems to explain troubling events, intuitive thinkers are more likely to accept it without subjecting it to rigorous scrutiny. Feelings of powerlessness and lack of control contribute significantly to conspiracy belief. Research has shown that when people feel they lack control over important aspects of their lives, they are more likely to see patterns in random information and to believe in conspiracies. This makes sense as a compensatory mechanism. If the world seems chaotic and one's own efforts seem futile, believing that someone is actually in control, even if that someone is a malevolent conspiracy, is psychologically preferable to believing that no one is in control and that events are largely random or driven by impersonal forces. The conspiracy theory restores a sense of order and predictability. Things are not happening randomly but according to a plan. This plan may be evil, but at least it means the universe is not fundamentally indifferent, and that human agency, even if exercised by villains, matters. Political ideology and partisanship influence conspiracy belief in complex ways. Conspiracy theories exist across the political spectrum, with left-wing conspiracies typically focusing on corporate power and right-wing conspiracies focusing on government overreach, though there is significant overlap and cross-pollination. What matters more than specific ideological content is the intensity and rigidity of political beliefs. People who are highly partisan, who view politics in starkly good versus evil terms, who feel threatened by the other side, are more susceptible to conspiracies that vilify their political opponents. Moderate, pragmatic individuals who see complexity and merit in multiple perspectives are generally less attracted to conspiracy theories. This suggests that conspiracy belief is partly a function of psychological need for clear moral categories and strong group identity rather than simply a matter of having certain political views. The personality trait of antagonism or oppositional identity also correlates with conspiracy belief. Some people define themselves partly through opposition to mainstream society and institutions, and they take pride in being contrarians, in questioning official narratives, in not being sheep who follow the crowd. For these individuals, conspiracy theories provide a way to express and reinforce this oppositional identity. Believing in the Illuminati is not just about the factual claim that such an organization exists, but is also a statement about who one is as a person. It says, "I am someone who thinks for myself, who is not fooled by appearances, who has the courage to challenge power." This identity component makes conspiracy beliefs resistant to evidence because changing one's mind would feel like betraying one's sense of self, like becoming one of the conformist masses one has defined oneself against. The digital age has amplified all of these psychological mechanisms while adding new dimensions. The algorithmic curation of content creates filter bubbles where people are primarily exposed to information that confirms their existing beliefs. The anonymity and distance of online interaction reduces social pressure toward conformity with mainstream views. The gamification of conspiracy investigation, where finding patterns and making connections is treated as a puzzle to be solved, makes conspiracy thinking addictive and entertaining. The parasocial relationships that people form with conspiracy content creators on YouTube or social media create emotional bonds that make their claims more persuasive. The speed at which information and misinformation spread online overwhelms critical thinking abilities that evolved for slower-paced information environments. Understanding the psychology of conspiracy belief does not mean dismissing believers as simply irrational or gullible. The cognitive biases and psychological needs that lead to conspiracy thinking are universal human characteristics, not defects limited to a particular subset of people. Under the right circumstances, with sufficient social support and emotional investment, almost anyone can come to believe things that seem obviously false to outsiders. The people who believe in the Illuminati are not fundamentally different from those who do not. They are responding to the same basic human needs for understanding, control, meaning, and belonging, but are responding in ways that lead them away from accuracy rather than toward it. Recognizing this can foster empathy and might suggest approaches for engaging with conspiracy believers that are more likely to be effective than simply presenting facts and expecting immediate persuasion. The journey from the actual Bavarian Illuminati to the mythical conspiracy that dominates contemporary imagination reveals as much about human nature and society as it does about secret societies themselves. What began as a small organization of frustrated intellectuals in 18th century Bavaria, existing for barely more than a decade and achieving modest influence at best, has been transformed through centuries of reinterpretation into an all-powerful force supposedly directing human history. This transformation is not simply a story of misunderstanding or deliberate deception, though both have played roles. It is fundamentally a story about what happens when historical events become symbols, when facts become detached from context, and when psychological needs shape collective narratives more powerfully than evidence. The gap between what the Illuminati was and what it has become tells us something profound about how humans construct meaning in a complex world that often seems beyond their comprehension or control. The historical Illuminati, to review what can be established with reasonable confidence, was founded by Adam Weishaupt in 1776 as a society dedicated to enlightenment principles and opposed to the political power of the Catholic Church and absolute monarchy. It attracted perhaps 2,000 members at its peak, including some notable intellectuals and a few minor nobles, primarily in German-speaking regions of Europe. It operated through secrecy, elaborate rituals, and systematic recruitment, infiltrating Masonic lodges to gain access to influential networks. Its members discussed progressive philosophy, corresponded about strategies for advancing rationalist ideas, and positioned themselves, when possible, in academic and government roles, where they could have some influence. The organization was discovered by Bavarian authorities who published many of its internal documents and was effectively destroyed by 1787 through government suppression and internal conflicts. This is what actually happened, documented in archives and correspondence that historians can examine. What the Illuminati achieved during its brief existence is debatable, but was almost certainly far less than either its members hoped or its critics feared. It influenced some academic appointments at German universities. It provided networking opportunities for like-minded intellectuals. It spread Enlightenment ideas somewhat more effectively than they might have spread otherwise. It perhaps contributed to a general climate of criticism toward traditional authorities, but it did not cause the French Revolution, did not establish a secret world government, did not create modern capitalism or communism, did not control the founding of the United States, and did not persist beyond the 18th century as a functioning organization. The dramatic claims made by Barruel, Robison, and their intellectual descendants are not supported by credible evidence. They are interpretations imposed on events, connections imagined rather than documented, patterns seen where none exist. The actual Illuminati was a footnote to the Enlightenment, interesting primarily because it showed how Enlightenment ideas could be organized into a movement, and because its exposure generated conspiracy theories that would outlive it by centuries. Yet dismissing the Illuminati mythology as simply false misses something important. The myth has been more historically significant than the reality. The conspiracy theories about the Illuminati have shaped political discourse, influenced policy decisions, motivated social movements, and affected how millions of people understand power and history. Conservative reactions to the French Revolution were intensified by beliefs about Illuminati conspiracy, leading to increased suppression of dissent and progressive movements. Anti-Masonic movements in the United States drew on Illuminati mythology to attack fraternal organizations and political opponents. 20th century right-wing extremism frequently incorporated Illuminati narratives into broader conspiracy worldviews. Contemporary distrust of institutions and resistance to public health measures are partly rooted in conspiracy thinking that traces back through decades of accumulated theory that includes the Illuminati as a central component. The imaginary Illuminati has had real consequences, which makes it a legitimate subject of study, even though the organization it supposedly describes has not existed for over 2 centuries. This raises interesting questions about the relationship between reality and belief, between what is true and what is consequential. Philosophers and social scientists have long recognized that beliefs affect behavior regardless of whether those beliefs are accurate. If people believe that a shadowy elite controls world events, they will act on that belief, perhaps by disengaging from conventional politics they view as theater, by supporting political movements that promise to drain the swamp or fight the deep state, by rejecting information from mainstream sources they view as compromised, or by engaging in activism or even violence against supposed conspirators. The falsity of the belief does not prevent it from shaping the world. In this sense, the Illuminati exists as a social fact, a shared idea that organizes collective behavior, even though it does not exist as an actual organization. This is a strange form of reality, where something that is not true in a correspondence sense is nonetheless true in a pragmatic sense, because belief in it has measurable effects. The persistence of Illuminati conspiracy theories also points to genuine features of how power operates in modern societies that the theories misidentify and exaggerate, but that contain kernels of truth. Power is often exercised behind closed doors through networks of personal connections. Economic elites do have disproportionate political influence. Policy is sometimes made through opaque processes that exclude public input. International institutions do constrain national sovereignty in ways that trouble some observers. Corporate and financial interests do sometimes collude to advance shared agendas. Government agencies do sometimes engage in surveillance, manipulation, and even criminal activity that later comes to light. These are real phenomena that reasonable people can find troubling. Conspiracy theories take these legitimate concerns and distort them into fantasized narratives of unified, coordinated, centuries-long plotting by an identifiable group. This is where the theories go wrong, not in recognizing that power is often hidden, and that the powerful often act in self-interest, but in imposing false order and false agency on complex systems. The reality of how power functions in modern societies is simultaneously less dramatic and more disturbing than conspiracy theories suggest. There is no single group directing everything according to a master plan. Instead, there are multiple overlapping networks of power based on wealth, political position, cultural influence, technological control, and other resources. These networks sometimes cooperate when they share interests, and sometimes conflict when their interests diverge. The The people within these networks are not united by membership in a secret society, but by common backgrounds, shared economic incentives, overlapping social networks, and similar worldviews developed through similar education and experiences. They do not need to conspire explicitly because their similar positions lead them to similar conclusions about what policies and arrangements benefit them. This structural analysis of power is more complex and harder to dramatize than conspiracy theories, but it is also more accurate and more useful for understanding and potentially addressing inequalities and injustices. The conspiracy theory version of power is oddly hopeful in a perverse way. If the Illuminati or a similar small group really controlled everything, then exposure of that group could theoretically solve the problem, rip away the curtain, reveal the conspirators, arrest or execute them, and a better world could emerge. This is a revolutionary fantasy that promises dramatic transformation through dramatic action. The structural analysis of power is bleaker because it suggests that problems are deeply embedded in systems and institutions, that no single group can be blamed. That transformation requires sustained effort across multiple fronts with uncertain prospects for success, and that even well-intentioned changes often have unintended consequences. Conspiracy theories offer villains who can be defeated. Structural analysis offers complex systems that must be gradually reformed through difficult political work. It is understandable why the conspiracy theory version is more psychologically appealing, even though it is less accurate. The question of what to do about conspiracy theories is one that societies are grappling with increasingly urgently. The traditional liberal approach has been to protect free speech and trust that in a marketplace of ideas, truth will eventually prevail over falsehood. But the digital age has tested this optimism severely. Conspiracy theories spread faster and more widely than debunking efforts. Attempts to censor or suppress them often backfire by confirming believers' suspicions and creating martyrs. Educational initiatives that teach critical thinking and media literacy may help some people resist conspiracy theories but require sustained investment and do not reach those already deeply immersed in conspiracy culture. The problem seems to require multiple approaches addressing different aspects of the phenomenon simultaneously. Reducing the psychological appeal of conspiracy theories might require addressing the underlying conditions that make them attractive. If people are drawn to conspiracies partly because they feel powerless, then creating more opportunities for genuine political participation and efficacy could help. If conspiracy theories flourish when institutions are distrusted, then making institutions more transparent, accountable, and responsive could reduce susceptibility. If people seek conspiracy theories for community and belonging, then providing alternative communities based on more constructive shared interests could compete with conspiracy culture. If conspiracy theories offer meaning and purpose, then helping people find meaning through art, spirituality, service, or other pursuits could reduce the need for conspiracy explanations. None of these approaches will eliminate conspiracy thinking, but they might reduce its prevalence at the margins. Engaging with conspiracy believers requires approaches that acknowledge the psychological and social functions their beliefs serve, rather than simply dismissing them as stupid or crazy. Research suggests that directly arguing with conspiracy believers and presenting contrary facts is usually ineffective and often counterproductive, activating defensive reactions and belief strengthening. More promising approaches involve asking questions that encourage believers to articulate their theories in detail, which can reveal inconsistencies. Introducing alternative explanations without explicitly contradicting the conspiracy theory, highlighting specific factual claims that are verifiably false rather than attacking the entire belief system at once, and maintaining respectful relationships that provide social connection not dependent on shared conspiracy belief. These approaches are slow and often frustrating, but they recognize that belief change is difficult and must navigate complex psychological and social terrain. The future of Illuminati conspiracy theories is likely to involve continued evolution and adaptation to new circumstances. As long as humans experience the cognitive biases and psychological needs that make conspiracy theories appealing, as long as societies contain genuine inequalities and hidden exercises of power that can be exaggerated into conspiracy narratives, as long as digital technologies enable rapid spread of misinformation and formation of insular communities, conspiracy theories will persist and probably flourish. The specific content will change as new villains are identified, new symbols are incorporated, new events are interpreted through conspiracy lenses, and new grievances are channeled into conspiratorial explanations. The Illuminati may fade as a central reference point or may be perpetually reinvented for new contexts, but the basic pattern of attributing complex events to secret societies of elite conspirators will almost certainly continue. What remains puzzling is why the Illuminati specifically, rather than any of dozens of other historical secret societies, became the dominant symbol of conspiracy. The Templars, the Rosicrucians, the Jesuits, Skull and Bones, Bilderberg Group, and many others feature in conspiracy theories but have not achieved the same cultural penetration as the Illuminati. Perhaps it is simply the evocative name, with its suggestion of illumination and enlightenment perverted into sinister, hidden knowledge. Perhaps it is the timing of the historical organization, existing just as Enlightenment rationalism was reaching its peak and just before the French Revolution provided a dramatic event to be explained. Perhaps it is the documentation, with the Bavarian government's publication of seized papers providing more concrete material for theorists to work with than exists for some other conspiracies. Perhaps it is the accumulated weight of centuries of theory building, with each generation adding to the mythology until it achieved critical mass. Likely, all of these factors and others contributed to the Illuminati becoming the conspiracy theory brand that endures. The academic study of conspiracy theories has itself become increasingly sophisticated, drawing on psychology, sociology, political science, history, and communication studies to understand how and why these beliefs form, spread, and persist. Researchers have moved beyond simply dismissing conspiracy theories as irrational to recognizing them as complex phenomena that serve multiple functions and that can tell us much about how people cope with uncertainty, complexity, and threatening social changes. Some scholars argue that conspiracy theories should be seen as a form of stigmatized knowledge, ideas that are rejected by mainstream institutions but that resonate with marginalized groups' experiences of exclusion and distrust. Others analyze conspiracy theories as political weapons used strategically to delegitimize opponents and mobilize supporters. Still others focus on the epistemological questions about how we know what we know and how we can distinguish between legitimate skepticism and conspiracy thinking. For individuals encountering Illuminati theories, whether through deliberate seeking or through algorithms that recommend such content, it is worth cultivating what might be called epistemological humility combined with methodological rigor. This means acknowledging that we cannot know everything with certainty, that mainstream institutions and authorities are sometimes wrong or misleading, that skepticism has value, but also that not all claims are equally credible, that evidence and logic matter, that expertise exists and should not be casually dismissed, and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. It means being willing to believe that powerful people sometimes conspire, as documented cases demonstrate they do, while also recognizing that not every significant event is the result of conspiracy and that the world is often more chaotic and less controlled than conspiracy theories suggest. This balance is difficult to maintain but essential for navigating an information environment where both naive credulity and paranoid conspiracy thinking lead away from truth. The Illuminati, in the end, offers us a mirror. The historical organization reflected the hopes and frustrations of Enlightenment intellectuals who believed reason could transform society and who were willing to use secrecy and manipulation in pursuit of that transformation. The conspiracy theories reflect the fears and anxieties of people across centuries who have struggled to make sense of rapid change, who have felt powerless in the face of forces they cannot control, and who have sought explanations that restore order and agency to what seems like chaos. Both the actual society and the imagined conspiracy tell us about human aspirations and limitations, about the tension between ideals and methods, about the seductive appeal of hidden knowledge and secret power. The story is not really about a group of Bavarian professors from the 1770s, but about how humans perpetually grapple with questions of power, knowledge, trust, and control. These questions remain unresolved, which ensures that some version of the Illuminati story will continue to be told, reimagined and updated for each new generation that confronts these eternal human concerns. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you can hold this complex truth lightly. The Illuminati was real, but not what the theories claim. The theories are false, but reveal authentic anxieties. Power is real, but diffuse. Conspiracies exist, but rarely as imagined. Symbols carry meanings, but those meanings shift across contexts and time. Human cognition is sophisticated but vulnerable to systematic biases. The world is neither completely ordered nor completely chaotic, neither fully understood nor wholly mysterious. And somewhere in Bavaria, in archives and libraries, documents from the 1780s sit quietly, bearing witness to a small, failed organization that accidentally became immortal, not through its own power, but through the collective imagination of millions who found in it a vessel for their fears and fascinations. The Illuminati endures not because it was successful, but because the human need to explain and order the world is inexhaustible, and because a good story, once it takes hold, is harder to kill than any actual conspiracy. Sleep well, knowing that the hidden masters, if they exist at all, are far more mundane and far less coordinated than the myths suggest, and that the real work of understanding the world requires patience, humility, and acceptance of complexity that conspiracy theories promise to eliminate but never actually can.